Hare Krishna. Welcome to the Founder Acharya Seminar Series. My name is Sureshwara Das. Back in 2011, while teaching at the Mayapur Institute, I noticed that my young students, because they had never seen Srila Prabhupada as I had, felt less connected and committed to him. If this continues, I thought, future generations of devotees will become so distant from his divine grace, his life, his teachings, his mood, his mission, that someday, not far away, there will be no more genuine Hare Krishna movement, only a shadow of what Prabhupada gave us. An intolerable prospect, I considered, especially for devotees committed to passing on Prabhupada's unique legacy as it is. That same year, with the encouragement of ISKCON leaders, many serving Srila Prabhupada's governing body, I began to develop a series of seminars titled Srila Prabhupada, Our Founder Acharya, subtitled Celebrating Srila Prabhupada's unique transcendental position in ISKCON, as well as every follower's foundational relationship with him. Now, since 2012, I've been traveling the ISKCON world with the seminar series, and by Srila Prabhupada's mercy, everyone who has taken the journey experiences a deeper relationship with his divine grace, a deeper commitment to his mission, and a deeper love for him. I'm glad and grateful you're taking the Founder Acharya journey today. In a world full of forces continually trying to divide us, Srila Prabhupada, as ISKCON's foundational spiritual master, remains the unity amid our ever-increasing diversity. The master at whose feet all masters sit, our beloved Founder Acharya. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to Srila Prabhupada, Our Founder Acharya Seminar Series from right here at ISKCON, Tucson, Arizona, USA. It's Sunday, March 18th. My name is Sureshwara Das, and for the next 10 Sundays, we're going to be on a journey with Srila Prabhupada. Let's take a look at this journey. I call it the overview. There's an iconic picture of Prabhupada taken in 1967 in San Francisco when the New York devotees, whom Prabhupada had left to go open up a second chapter of ISKCON, said they were lonely, and Prabhupada said, well, just put my picture on my seat. And they said, well, we don't have a picture. So Prabhupada said, all right, well, we'll take some pictures. So Roger Siegel, who became Guru Das, took some pictures which became famous, and this is one of them. First 3 lessons of our seminar series, Sambandha, deepening our relationship with Srila Prabhupada. It's following the Vedantic scheme of Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. This is how we learn anything. First we establish a relationship with whoever or whatever we're learning. Then we act in the relationship, and then we taste the fruit of the relationship. So in our case, we're talking about Srila Prabhupada. So the first 3 lessons, we're going to deepen our relationship with Srila Prabhupada. And in the first lesson, it's called The Spiritual Masters. We're going to have a little guided tour of Guru Tattva as Prabhupada presents Guru Tattva in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, very first chapter. It's called The Spiritual Masters. Lesson 2, the Founder Acharya Principle. This is a guru of gurus, not simply a guru, but is such a powerful guru that this guru is empowered actually to revive an entire sampradaya or change the course of a sampradaya. Lesson 3, the third Sunday, will take a look at how our Founder Acharya fulfilled that role like no one ever has that we know. After a Sambandha comes Abhideya, which in our case means deepening our commitment to Srila Prabhupada's mission, his mission's roots, his ISKCON branch, his Varnashram challenge, and finally finding our mission in his mission. Once we pass through Abhideya, commit to the mission, then we're qualified to approach Prayojana, which is deepening our love for Srila Prabhupada. To love is to cooperate. That is arguably Prabhupada's, what I call his Mahavakya, his most important utterance to us. At the beginning, the middle, and the end of his stay with us, he was always urging us to cooperate, because it was non-cooperation that fragmented his own master's mission. Lesson 9 is a very interesting, it's almost a timeout, because just before we get to the final lesson, your Srila Prabhupada, I'd like us to clear misconceptions about Srila Prabhupada, both impersonal and sentimental. And if we have those misconceptions, we can't authentically enter deeply into a relationship with Srila Prabhupada. So that's the scope and sequence of the seminar series. And what happens is I ask you questions while I'm presenting the slides, and then I be quiet, and then you ask me questions. So if you think of a question, if something sounds funny or you're not sure, make a mental note of it, or a physical note, or an electronic note, and please ask me at the end. Okay, any questions about where we're going? Okay, let's go. Lesson 1, the Spiritual Masters. In this first lesson, we'll examine how all bona fide gurus are one, how they're different, and how they're one and different from Lord Krishna, the original guru. So there in the picture, raise your hand if you can tell us who's in the picture. If you can read the... Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, yes. And he's very elderly, and his his senses are failing him. We would say today he has Parkinson's. And he's weak, but he's determined to glorify Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he knows that by the mercy of his Guru Maharaj, who happens to be Lord Nityananda, his Diksha Guru, that he can do it. So lesson 1 is called the Spiritual Masters. And in the very first verse of the entire Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Kaviraj Goswami says, well, just the first 2 words of the verse. He says, Bande Gurun. So, Prabhu, you want to read that?
I offer my respectful obeisances unto my spiritual masters.
Plural. You notice it's plural. Bande Gurun. And Prabhupada comments on this, not right after the verse, but before the verse, in the end of the introduction. Srila Prabhupada writes, Kaviraj Goswami uses the plural here to indicate the disciplic succession. He offers obeisances not to his spiritual master alone, who was none other than Lord Nityananda, but to the whole parampara, the chain of disciplic succession beginning with Lord Krishna himself. So to deepen our understanding of Srila Prabhupada's position as our founder Acharya, let's first look briefly at Prabhupada's presentation of the Guru in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita as one and as many. First, what is a Guru? There's Srila Prabhupada at New Vrindavan. I was there, so I knew it's Saturday, September 2nd, 1972. The situation was the Hare Krishna movement was all of 6 years old, and the press and politicians and scholars noticed that we weren't going away. We weren't like these other fly-by-night groups. There was such a spike in gurus, swamis, and yogis coming to the West in those days. But the Hare Krishna movement was solid. And they didn't know that, but they noticed we weren't going away. So Prabhupada said, well, invite them. We'll have a Bhagavat Dharma discourse in New Vrindavan in the summer, when it's nice. There you see Prabhupada on his Vyasa Puja day, sitting on the big throne, and Prabhupada knew that these people from America, the egalitarian, all men are created equal America, are going to wonder, why is this person sitting on this big fancy throne? Who does he think he is? So Prabhupada, he spent the whole Vyasa Puja address trying to demystify the Guru, because Guru was a buzzword, Guru, Swamis, and Yogis. And he said the Guru was just like a postman, post-peon. He's just carrying the letter, the message of God. That's all. He's God's representative. So it's nothing mysterious, and he doesn't, just like the mailman, if he's bona fide, he doesn't open the letter, he doesn't tamper with the mail. He just delivers a message as it is. And then he went even further down. He said, actually, the Guru was like the dog of God. because especially if you want to meet a big man in this world, somebody big in this world, it's very hard to meet that person. The person is probably surrounded by secretaries and servants and PR people and guards. But if you happen to see this big person in this world walking his dog in the park, and Prabhupada always used either Ford or Rockefeller in those days. If you happen to see Mr. Ford or Mr. Rockefeller walking his dog, and you simply give that dog a 2-cent lozenge, like a little candy, then Mr. Ford will think, oh, you're so nice. You must love me because you love my dog. Love me, love my dog. So Prabhupada said, so similarly, I'm the dog of God. It's very difficult. Krishna is greater than the greatest. How can you approach Krishna? But if you simply please me, I'm his dog, very easily Krishna will be pleased. So right on cue, one devotee said, how can we please you, Srila Prabhupada? Now the evening news cameras are whirring, and the New York Times is there, right? And Mother Earth News, which in those days was a big back to the land paper. They're taking notes. So how can we please you? And Prabhupada says, chant Hare Krishna. So immediately a big kirtan was struck up, and that was the end of the talk. And we all bowed down, and we have a big kirtan. Then Prabhupada got off his big crimson throne there, and he got into a little yellow Volkswagen and rode away. So that's Srila Prabhupada. He was trying to help the guests understand what was going on here. Let's look at the way guru is often used. Let's start very basic. Don't think anything spiritual. How is the word guru often used when you hear it on the news or read it in the paper or on the internet? How are they using the word? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Someone who is expert or learned.
Exactly. Nothing particularly spiritual. Want to read that?
Popularly, a person who has knowledge or expertise. Expert. A sports guru.
Yeah, for example, a sports guru. Like I was at the post office not long ago. It was a complicated transaction involving a big package, insurance, and other things. And so the clerk said, just a minute, Mr. Hall, I have to call my postal guru to understand how to complete this transaction. So people have their political guru, their fashion guru, their relationship guru, just some kind of advisor, some kind of expert, right? A step above that is in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, the Avanti Brahmana is saying that he has many, many gurus, and he means gurus in nature. Ramana?
Naturally. A teacher in nature. A tree teaches tolerance.
Yeah. Trees standing in all seasons, people carve their initials, dogs are relieving themselves on the tree, but the tree is just an example of tolerance. Literally, a step up from that, the word guru means, Vibhya?
Literally, one who is heavy with knowledge.
Yes, and a metaphorical definition also is one who is able to drive away the darkness of ignorance. You'll hear that too. Now let's hear Prabhupada define the term guru perfectly in terms of the scriptures.
Standard knowledge is received from the parampara system, disciplic succession. Therefore, it is said, Sotriyam. Sotriyam means who has heard from the parampara system. Sotriyam, and the result is Brahmanishtam, is firmly fixed up in the service of the Supreme Personality of God.
Shrotriyam. He's heard properly from the right source, and he's fixed up in devotional service. Yes, he walks the talk, we say. Okay, so even if we know what a guru is, as we know perfectly from our founder Acharya, do we know why we need a guru? Why do we need a guru? Okay, who can identify a verse to match this moment from the Bhagavad Gita? What's going on here? It looks like Arjuna is begging Krishna something. Raise your hand. This is an Arjuna moment. This is right in the beginning of the second chapter, near the beginning. The first chapter, Arjuna gave us the reasons why he didn't want to fight. Basically 4 reasons, and then he adds one at the beginning of the second. And then after giving all his reasons, he's morose. He's confused. There's a hint. Now I am confused, right, about my duty, and have lost all composure because of miserly weakness. Now I am asking you clearly to tell me what is beneficial for me. Now I am your disciple. Now we're friends, I know, but now I'm your disciple, and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. So Prabhupada takes the opportunity of this verse to describe really why we need a guru. Still?
By nature's own way, the complete system of material activities is a source of perplexity for everyone. In every step there is perplexity, and therefore it behooves one to approach a bona fide spiritual master who can give one proper guidance for executing the purpose of life.
Mm-hmm. To learn almost anything, we need a teacher. Even to tie our shoes, Guru Ma, our mother, has to teach us how to tie our shoes. Yet when it comes to studying the highest science, quote, the spiritual science of the self, Prabhupada says in Gita 1032 purport, we often naively think we can be our own guru. Do it yourself, right? It doesn't work. So once we understand why we need a guru, it is important we connect with a genuine guru to whom we can surrender. In one sense, of course, all genuine gurus are the same. Let's see how all real gurus are the same. There's Krishna playing his flute, and of course, Krishna is the original guru. He's the original everything. Sometimes we hear Lord Nityananda is the original guru, or Lord Balaram, because he's the first expansion, original go-between between God and us. But in another sense, and you'll also see this in the scriptures, Krishna is the original guru. So how, that's a hint, I say this because it's a hint of what the answer is to the question. How is the guru one? Anyone? Raise your hand.
They all say the same thing.
What are they saying?
They don't change what's said in the Parampara.
Okay, but take it back to...
Krishna.
Yeah. They're all repeating Krishna's message. Right? So let's read what... Divya, why don't you read what Prabhupada says here?
The guru is one because he comes in cyclic succession. What Vyasadeva and Krishna taught 5,000 years ago, or what Vyasadeva and Krishna taught 5,000 years ago, is also being taught now. There is no difference between the two instructions. Although hundreds and thousands of acharyas have come and gone, the message is one.
Message is one. It's the message of Krishna. That's why Lord Chaitanya said, Yare Dako, whoever you meet, Tarikaha, tell them, Krishna Upadesh, tell them what Krishna says. Amara Gyai Guru Hanya, by my order, you become a guru, Tare Desh, and save this place. The message is one. It's Krishna's message. Although one in message with Krishna, all true gurus also differ. How is that? So let's see how gurus differ. Guru is one, guru is many. Okay, so Damodar, read that.
My role. The initiating and instructing spiritual masters are equal and identical manifestations of Krishna, although they have different dealings.
Different dealings. Okay, what is that? There's the key, there's the beginning of the difference. There's always a oneness and a difference to everything. That's the nature of reality. Achintya, Beda, Beda, Tattva. So they have different dealings. For example, in a Gaudiya scripture called Sri Krishna Bhajanamrita, text 48, Srila Narahari Sarkar, he's the one we sing when we sing the Arti song. Narahari Adikari Chabaradulaya. In that song, Bhaktivinoda envisions Narahari Sarkar fanning Lord Chaitanya with a chamara whisk. Srila Narahari Sarkar, Thakur, also wrote a nice book, Sri Krishna Bhajanamrita, and in text 48, the Thakur says, quote, a disciple may hear some instructions from another advanced Vaishnav, but after gaining that good instruction, he must bring it and present it to his own spiritual master. He should hear the same teachings gained from his own spiritual master with appropriate instructions. So we don't live in a vacuum. We're going to hear so many things from so many sadhus. But it's important we be grounded also in the relationship with our own personal spiritual master. So we can check out what we've heard, and also so we can understand how to apply what we've heard in our own lives from our personal spiritual master. Okay, so observation. I make an observation about this. In ISKCON's global family, initiating gurus are like parents, and instructing gurus are like well-wishing relatives. Yet their relative prominence in our lives depends on the relationships we develop with them. Sometimes we are closer to our parents, and sometimes we grow closer to our uncles and aunties. For example, as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur did. We were speaking about this yesterday. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur was initiated by one Bipin Bihari Goswami, and he always had a respectful relationship with the Maharaj, but he became somewhat distant from Bipin Bihari over time on two issues. One especially was the nature of the parampara, as we'll see in the next lesson, the founder Acharya principle. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he became convinced that the parampara was a line of instructors and instructed, a shiksha line. And Bipin Bihari Goswami, apparently, from the history, was more focused on it being a line of initiators and initiated. And we'll see how those two compare in the next lesson. So that's one difference. And the other difference was Bhaktivinoda, he made it a kind of crusade to really pin down, now that he had single-handedly revived Lord Chaitanya's teachings and revived the good name of the Gaudiya line. He wanted to pin down where Lord Chaitanya actually appeared. He became convinced by studying maps and talking to old sadhus and reading histories that Lord Chaitanya in fact appeared not on the Navadvip side of the Ganges, where Bipin Bihari Goswami was and where he maintained that Lord Chaitanya appeared, but on the Mayapur side. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur, over time, he became closer to actually the most famous Vaishnava of the time was Srila Jagannath Das Babaji, whom we see in the Parampara. He's called Vaishnava Sarvabhauma. He was the chief of the Vaishnavas of the day, and he was so old. He was born in the 1700s, and he was still alive in the late 1800s. So when Srila Bhaktivinoda took Jagannath Das Babaji to the spot that became, we call now Yog Pit, the place where Lord Chaitanya appeared. Even though he was so old, he had to be carried around in a basket by his disciples, Jagannath Das Babaji. He miraculously leaped out of the basket, Hari Bol, affirming that yes, this is the spot. This is it. So, Bhaktivinoda always maintained a respectful relationship, but he became closer in Shiksha to Jagannath Das Babaji, and that's why you see on our altars Jagannath Das Babaji preceding Bhaktivinoda. So, but nonetheless, if all our gurus are truly well-wishers, serving cooperatively in the mission of our founder Acharya, who is really everyone's foundational guru, harmony does prevail. More about this point in lesson 2, the founder Acharya principle. So that's one way gurus differ. Some are more like parents, and some are more like uncles and aunties. And different things happen, just like in life. Different things happen between parents and children. But if all are our well-wishers, then the harmony prevails. There's no envy there. So by role, the next way they differ is by qualification. Okay, Divya?
By qualification, a person who is liberated, acharya and guru, cannot commit any mistake, but there are persons who are less qualified or not liberated, but still can act as guru and acharya by strictly following the disciplic succession. Notice
this phrase, strictly following. Prabhupada brings this up time and again. You don't have to be Superman or Superwoman to be a guru, but you do have to strictly follow your guru, which means having knowledge and acting on the knowledge. Now, some people might say, well, that's just a letter to this fellow Janardhan way back in early days of ISKCON, April 68. I only believe what's in Prabhupada's books. Well, guess what? Right in the Bhagavatam purport, we get the same point. Quote, Prabhupada writes in his purport to Bhagavatam 4.18.5, this Krishna consciousness movement directly receives instructions from the Supreme Personality of Godhead via persons who are strictly following his instructions. Although a follower may not be a liberated person, if he follows the Supreme Liberated Personality of Godhead, his actions are naturally liberated from the contamination of the material nature. Lord Chaitanya therefore says, by my order you may become a spiritual master. And then Prabhupada says, one can immediately become a spiritual master by having full faith in the transcendental words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and by strictly following his instructions. There it is. Yeah. So it's simple, but it's no small thing to strictly follow. Observation, liberated or non-liberated, a guru is genuine if he, quote, strictly follows the orders of Guru and Krishna. In this way, according to one's capacity, everyone can become a guru and please our founder Acharya and Lord Chaitanya. As Srila Prabhupada put it, quote, now listen to this, because people are in darkness, we require many millions of gurus. That means regular gurus. Doesn't mean you have to be Superman, an avatar, or Nityasiddha. Millions of gurus to enlighten them. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya's mission is, he said, every one of you become guru. And then Prabhupada says, and if you think, oh, but I have no qualification, how can I become guru? There is no need of qualification. Still I can become guru? Excuse me. Yes. How? Whomever you meet, you simply instruct what Krishna has said. That's all. You become guru. So remember that, because as the lesson goes on, it's going to become very obvious what Prabhupada wants in terms of the guru-disciple culture in ISKCON. So by role, by qualification, obviously different gurus play different roles in different people's lives, even within one God family. According to how Krishna has brought a certain disciple in, one disciple may have a certain relationship with their, say, their Diksha Guru, and another disciple is going to have a completely different relationship depending on the history. Okay, now another way, interesting way that gurus differ is by commitment. So, let's see. Ernesto.
The spiritual master who first gives information about spiritual life is called the Vartma Pradarshaka Guru. The spiritual master who initiates according to the regulations of the Shastras is called the Diksha Guru, and the spiritual master who gives instructions for elevation is called the Shiksha Guru.
Notice the progression. Vartma Pradarshaka means introducer, like who introduced Srila Prabhupada to, besides his father?
His friend?
His friend, Narendranath Mullik. Now, to the best of my knowledge, Narendranath Mullik never actually joined the Gaudiya Math, but he did introduce Prabhupada to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, so he's a kind of guru for Srila Prabhupada. Now, the progression goes from introducer to initiator, and that's a whole other level of commitment. The guru agrees to take charge of the disciple. The disciple regards the guru as a true representative of Krishna. And before the sacred fire and the deities and the Vaishnavas and the guru, vows are made, and it's a very serious matter. Now, of course, what the ceremony is only an official public recognition of what should have already taken place in the heart. A change of heart should have happened. And that's only possible, we'll see a little later in the lesson, if we have a bona fide guru and a bona fide disciple. So note the progressive commitment from introducing to initiating to instructing. Why is that? Because whatever the guru's doing, the guru is always teaching. Even if the guru doesn't open his or her mouth, the guru is instructing. And because example is better than precept. Once upon a time, our legendary godbrother Vishnujana Maharaj was in Mayapur, and he was really taken with the idea of going down the Ganga with one of these little boats and putting into these little hamlets on the shores and enlivening the villagers with Harinam. But he had a doubt, and his doubt was, he said, Srila Prabhupada, I'd love to do this, take a party of men with instruments and prasad and the holy name, but I don't speak the language. And so Prabhupada just laughed. He said, they don't care what you say. They just want to see how you behave. Achar, example, is better than prachar, precept. Actions speak louder than words. That's what we say. Okay, so here's another reference about the level of commitment. In the 10th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 80, text 32, Lord Krishna tells Sudama Brahmana, quote, "My dear friend, he who gives a person his physical birth is his first spiritual master." That's in a spiritual society, right? We don't always have that experience, but in the best of worlds, yes. "And he who initiates him as a twice-born Brahmin and engages him in religious duties is indeed more directly his spiritual master." Twice born, right? "But the person who bestows transcendental knowledge, instruction, upon the members of all the spiritual orders of society is one's ultimate spiritual master. Indeed, he is as good as my own self." So whichever guru, shiksha or diksha, commits to giving us the most guidance naturally becomes more prominent in our lives. Now, having examined the oneness and difference among gurus, we're ready to look at how all true gurus are really different manifestations of Krishna's mercy. So there is Narada Muni, acting as the spiritual master. There's Srila Vyasadeva, a literary incarnation of Krishna, acting as the disciple. And let's see, Damodar, you want to read?
"I first offer my respectful obeisances at the lotus feet of my initiating spiritual master and all my instructing spiritual masters."
Yes. So there's a singular spiritual master there, and then there's many instructors. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada comments, "A devotee must have only one initiating spiritual master, because in the scriptures, acceptance of more than one is always forbidden. There is no limit, however, to the number of instructing spiritual masters one may accept. Generally, a spiritual master who constantly instructs a disciple in spiritual science becomes his initiating spiritual master later on." So there's 3 sentences there. Let's look at each one. When Prabhupada writes, "A devotee must have only one initiating spiritual master, because in the scriptures, acceptance of more than one is always forbidden." Do we follow that in ISKCON? You have to know ISKCON's history a little bit. No. Because we had a real dark night of the soul in the 1980s in ISKCON, and because of the offense of imitating Prabhupada's position as the founder Acharya, many people acting as gurus fell by the wayside, because there had to be a consequence for that kind of imitation. So when that happened, people who were disciples felt devastated, because they thought they had no standing in spiritual life, because it was really just all about their initiating guru. And then other gurus who were still in good standing said, "Don't worry, I can give you shelter." And so they, quote, reinitiated them. Now it says here, acceptance of more than one is always forbidden. Again, I like the parent analogy. Say you have a nice childhood with your parents, but then all of a sudden they start to go bad. They get mixed up in criminal activity or drugs, and you have to take some distance from them. Now they're still your parents. They're always your parents, but maybe you have to take guidance from others at that point. So, technically speaking, there's no need for reinitiation, although I'll tell you there is a higher principle acting here, and it's the principle Prabhupada always showed, the principle of compassion. Say, even though there's technically no need for it, or even though Prabhupada writes that it's forbidden, say somehow someone has been so traumatized by the fall of their spiritual master that they just feel they have no standing and they can't go on in Krishna consciousness unless they reestablish a relationship with someone in good standing. So sometimes out of compassion, ISKCON gurus have done that, and they usually make it clear this is really not necessary, but if it will help you go on, continue, which is really the bottom line. Don't give up. Then they do it. There is no limit, however, to the number of instructing spiritual masters one may accept. Yes. And that's why you'll see in a later lesson, to parody an African phrase, the phrase is, it takes a village to raise a child. So I coined the phrase, it takes a sampradaya to raise a sadhaka. Because you see, it's really not about one person. Just like in our lives, the parents are very important, but if they're good parents, they'll introduce us to so many good people. Okay. Then Prabhupada writes, generally a spiritual master who constantly instructs a disciple in spiritual science becomes his initiating spiritual master later on. Do we do that in ISKCON? Do people who get a lot of guidance from someone necessarily get initiated by that person that's giving us a lot of guidance locally? Sometimes. But very often someone else flies in and initiates us, right? Now who started that? Prabhupada, but out of necessity. He was traveling all over the world, exploding a worldwide Hare Krishna movement. He had to, of necessity, delegate the responsibility for the mutual examination of prospective guru and prospective disciple. He had to delegate that to temple presidents. So the temple presidents had to recommend people to Prabhupada for initiation, and he trusted their judgment. So that he did of necessity, but he's saying at the same time, we need millions of gurus. That means he's expecting that over time, for people to grow up and initiate. I have a godbrother in Gainesville, Florida, rather well known, Kalakanta Prabhu. Now he initiates people. He's a householder, he has children, and he also initiates. So, I don't know if he does this every time, but he told me that he initiates people very often like this, introducing himself to them as, or formalizing at the ceremony the relationship as, I'm your spiritual master, your initiating spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada's our founder Acharya. There are so many senior devotees you can take instruction from. And now I want to see you become so fixed up in Krishna consciousness and absorbed in Prabhupada's mission that in 10 years' time you could initiate. And you're going to hear later in the seminar series Prabhupada saying the same thing in letters. So today's student, today's disciple is supposed to be tomorrow's teacher, tomorrow's master, but always thinking oneself a student and a disciple, never thinking he's so qualified. Okay, so all genuine gurus are different manifestations of Krishna's mercy. Observation. In this last sentence, Srila Prabhupada indicates the natural normative guru-disciple relationship sustainable over time. That sentence again being, generally a spiritual master who constantly instructs a disciple in spiritual science becomes his initiating spiritual master later on. This is what was going on for thousands of years in village India. A sadhu is instructing people, develop shraddha, faith in that sadhu, and the sadhu agrees to take the listeners to the next step, bhajana kriya, a formal guru-disciple relationship. To help our guru-disciple culture become more local and sustainable, we need to train and empower, quote, millions of gurus worldwide to act as local spiritual masters, both initiating and instructing, as Srila Prabhupada has indicated. Still, one may wonder, is the categorical status of a Shiksha Guru really equal to that of a Diksha Guru? We wonder that because that's what happened after Prabhupada left our vision. The whole spotlight was focused on the Diksha Guru. And that who is certainly crucial, vital, but that's not all of Guru Tattva. Guru is one, Guru is many. So let's look at this idea of Shiksha and Diksha, the relative status. Okay. Damodar?
There is no difference between the shelter-giving Supreme Lord and the initiating and instructing spiritual masters. If one foolishly discriminates between them, he commits an offense in discharge of devotional service.
He commits an offense in the discharge of devotional service. So not only are they equal and identical manifestations of Krishna, to think otherwise is actually going to hurt you. It's offensive to think like that. Observation: the tendency to think of the Shiksha Guru as categorically inferior to the Diksha Guru is a hangover from ISKCON's Zonal Acharya era, when Diksha Gurus were often artificially inflated and conflated with the founder Acharya. More about the Zonal Acharya era in Lesson 9. Now, as the next two slides remind us, the essence of initiation and instruction is the transference of Krishna consciousness. This is really important. This is the essence of Shiksha and Diksha. And here we are with a famous painting by Jadharani Mataji, my dear god sister. Krishna has appeared as Vishnu in the prison house of Kamsa, and then at the request of his devotees playing the part of his parents, he turns into baby Krishna. I chose this because there's a beautiful purport and verse in the 10th canto in this very chapter, which describes how Krishna appeared in the womb of Devaki. And it's just, it's so beautiful. Divya.
Thereafter, accompanied by planetary expansions, the fully opulent Supreme Personality Godhead, who is all auspicious to the entire universe, was transferred from the mind of Vasudeva to the mind of Devaki.
That's how Krishna was conceived. First, from the mind, the consciousness of Vasudeva, to the mind of Devaki. This is the Hare Krishna Immaculate Conception, right? And
the transference of Krishna consciousness is the essence of initiation and instruction. One at a time. Devaki, having thus been initiated by Vasudeva, became beautiful by carrying Lord Krishna, the original consciousness for everyone. The cause of all causes within the core of her heart, just as the east becomes beautiful by carrying the rising moon.
So poetic and so profound. Devaki, having thus been initiated by Vasudeva. Vasudeva was carrying Krishna in his heart, and he transferred that intense devotional meditation to the fertile receiver, Devaki. And she became beautiful, just as the East becomes beautiful by carrying the rising moon. Then Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada in the purport, writes this, quote, "We should note carefully that the Lord was transferred to Devaki not by the ordinary way for a human being, but by diksha, initiation. Thus, the importance of initiation is mentioned here. Unless one is initiated by the right person, who always carries within his heart the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one cannot acquire the power to carry the Supreme Godhead within the core of one's own heart." So it's really important that the person playing the role of master be Krishna conscious, and that the person who's approaching the master also has the right motive to serve, or else the ceremony that will happen, it'll be a show. Prabhupada said, when he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, I accepted him immediately, not officially, but in my heart. And I just heard Prabhupada in Hyderabad saying that when I was introduced to the mission, that was the real initiation, the mission of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So, if gurus are one and different, then how much more so is the guru and God different? Now that might sound obvious, But it's not obvious to many people who merged Guru and God. With empowered genius, Srila Prabhupada was able to introduce this spiritual truth, the oneness and the difference of God and Guru, even to raw recruits. This is June 1966. At that point, he's in the Bowery, Skid Row, New York City. Out of compassion, he heard from some young people at Dr. Mishra's place, uptown, that the real action was on the Lower East Side. Now, the Bowery is right in the same area, but it's really the lowest of the low. But out of compassion, Prabhupada goes there. And he's living in this touch-and-go relationship with this unstable young person who later does attack him on LSD. So one fine day, Prabhupada's visited by a journalist and a photographer, and they want to do this story on the Swami. They heard a real, live, authentic Swami was holding discourses on the Lower East Side. So they took these amazing shots. I love this shot because Prabhupada he's looking so kind of vulnerable and alone, but he knows that only time is separating him from Krishna doing big things through him. And then in July, finally, after the whole violent incident happens with this young person, Prabhupada does get his own place with the help of different people. Especially Michael Grant, who became Mukunda, and now Mukunda Maharaj. In the Lilamrita, Satsvarup Maharaj describes the first initiation. It was going to happen on Vyasa Puja Day, 1966. Now on the eve of that day, of course, is Janmashtami. The Lilamrita reads like this. On Janmashtami Day, 1966, Srila Prabhupada announced on the eve of the first initiations, quote, "Initiation means that the spiritual master accepts the student and agrees to take charge, and the student accepts the spiritual master and agrees to worship him as God." He paused. No one spoke. Any questions? And when there were none, he got up and walked out. The students were stunned. Now, Prabhupada did this deliberately, because all summer he's been leading them in the chanting of Hare Krishna. He's been discoursing on the Bhagavad Gita, and he wants to see if they're actually ready for initiation. Because there's a famous verse, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, right? Inquire from him submissively. Render service unto him. The self-realized souls, it can be read singular or plural actually, can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. Now, Prabhupada, he doesn't want sentimental, cheap followers. So he's, so to speak, dropping a bomb on their heads, because all summer long he's been saying things like, if a guru thinks he's God, he's as good as dog. Because there's so many people, bogus avatars, etc. But here, on the eve of the first initiation, he says, the spiritual master accepts the student, agrees to take charge, and then the student accepts the guru as God. Notice the word as. Little word, big meaning. So after Swamiji, as they called him, did what he did, and got up off the dais and walked to his right and out the door right, through the courtyard and up to his apartment 2C, these first followers, they were just sitting there in stunned silence. And then finally they began to talk among themselves. Did you hear that? Did you hear what he said? I don't know if I can go through this initiation. And one student wasn't even there. He, about a week earlier, had been tricked by his parents. His parents had tricked him into being locked up in Bellevue Hospital. So one of the people in the storefront walked over to Bellevue, which wasn't far away, and was given some visitation time, and said to the devotee locked up, and this was Keith Ham, who later became Kirtanananda. And Keith was smart. So Wali said to Keith, this morning Swamiji dropped a bomb. He just said, tomorrow we're going to have something called initiation. And it means that the spiritual master, the guru, takes takes charge of you, and then you have to accept him as God. What do you think of that? So Keith was pretty shrewd. So he said, well, we're already accepting everything he says as the absolute truth. We may as well as accept him as God. What's the problem? Well, Wally wasn't quite convinced. So we went back to the storefront and said to Howard, who later became Hayagriva, Howard, will you please go up to Swamiji's apartment and ask him what he meant? So Howard is a big, tall, booming voice. He's an English professor. He has no qualms about asking Swamiji what he meant. So here's what happened. Howard asked, does what you told us this morning mean we are supposed to accept the spiritual master to be God? That means he is due the same respect as God, being God's representative, Prabhupada replied calmly. Then he is not God? No, Prabhupada said. Ernesto.
God is God. The spiritual master is his representative. Therefore, he is as good as God because he can deliver God to the sincere disciple. Is that clear?
That was clear. And so they went ahead and they took initiation. Now, if Howard or somebody from that group had not asked Swamiji for clarification, I'm convinced that Prabhupada would not have gone ahead and done that. Because right in the purport to that Tadvidhi verse, just try to learn the truth by approaching his spirit, Prabhupada says, both absurd inquiries and blind following are condemned. He doesn't want blind followers. So Howard was asking good questions, not absurd inquiries, and Prabhupada went ahead and he did it. Question, if Howard had not asked for clarification, it is unlikely Srila Prabhupada would have gone ahead the next day with the first initiations. Why? Just what I said, he doesn't want cheap, blind followers. So that is the orientation lesson. Next Sunday we're going to look at a guru of gurus. Somebody who's such an empowered spiritual master that he can take the whole sampradaya that he's coming in, that whole disciplic line, and reinvigorate it, redirect it, take it in a new direction, or as Srila Prabhupada did, take it all over the world. So before I take questions, I'm going to read lesson outcomes, because our relationship with Prabhupada practically affects everything we do. So the tendency is when we ask questions, we want to ask about everything under the sun. So try to focus your questions in terms of these, what we call lesson outcomes. By the end of the lesson, students will be able to identify different usages of the word, guru, from popular to perfect. We should be able to explain why we need a guru, explain how all genuine gurus are one, and also how they're different. Explain how the essence of initiation and instruction is the transference of Krishna consciousness. And finally, we should be able to recount how Srila Prabhupada introduced the oneness and the difference of Guru and God. Okay. Yes, let me just read the transition. This is a preview of next Sunday. All Vaishnav Guru-disciple relationships thrive under the shelter of the founder Acharya, the foundational spiritual master of a disciplic branch. In the next lesson, we'll examine the origin and development of the founder Acharya principle with the focus on our Gaudiya Vaishnav line. So does anybody have any questions, comments?
Yeah, you had mentioned that Srila Prabhupada had accepted his guru in his heart almost immediately. Now, typically after that has been established in a disciple, how long usually does it take for a guru to accept him as disciple? It's
really individual. It's a good question. What's the, we say gestation period, right? How Krishna brings us all back home, back to Godhead, it really, it's unique. We all have unique stories, and we all love to tell our stories, how I came. And it's all unique. Now, think about Srila Prabhupada's history, his case. By the time he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he was a married man. He was gainfully employed. in Dr. Kartik Chandra Bose's Bengal Chemical. Dr. Bose actually was the leader, the pioneer in pharmaceuticals in India. So Prabhupada, he was the best salesman in the whole company. And Prabhupada told us later, after he met his Guru Maharaj, he wished he could have just joined the mission. But then Prabhupada said, but it would have been injustice. He was a responsible human being. He wasn't going to abandon his wife and child. So what he thought was, because he knew there had been a prophecy, that he was destined to be a wealthy person. Like we would say today, like a Birla or a Dalmia. Or we would say in America, we say Ford, Rockefeller, or now we say Bill Gates or whatever. So his thought was, okay, I'm a householder, and in Vedic culture, being a householder is a phase of life. It's not like in the West where people say, till death do us part. So it's a phase of life. So we thought, well, okay, once the children are grown and once the business is wound down, I'll take my accumulated wealth and I'll do the mission. And that's what he tried to do, as we'll see in future lessons. So sometimes reporters would ask Prabhupada, when did you first meet your guru? And then he said 1922, and then the reporter might say, why did it take you so long? Well, Prabhupada said, better late than never. Or sometimes he would say, oh, it takes time to prepare. This was a big order, you know, to introduce a whole spiritual culture in the West. But as far as how long does it take initiation, that really depends. This is a good time to tell a story I like to share in this seminar series. When I was doing the basic research for this series in 2011, I was living in Hawaii, and something came to mind. A friend of mine, a colleague in ISKCON education, a lady, I knew her story of how she came to Krishna consciousness. Before she was in the movement, she was a teacher. And then in 1987, she came across, and she was from India, so she came across Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is, totally thrilled by it. This is the absolute truth. Wanted to meet the author, and then mortified to find out that the author had passed away in 1977. But she was so inspired that she became a devotee. She wanted to help serve Srila Prabhupada's mission. And then, fast forward to 1991, while she was in India, she had met an American disciple of Srila Prabhupada, a direct disciple, who she ended up marrying. And then she moved to America with him, because she's a teacher, so she's studying Prabhupada's books. So she noticed in the books that it says that one must accept initiation from a bona fide spiritual master. So she starts thinking, okay, I couldn't be Prabhupada's direct disciple, but Prabhupada's telling me I have to be initiated. So she writes a letter to a leader who has initiated disciples, and she's really inspired by his writings and his example. So she writes him to ask if she could start a relationship with him, with the idea of becoming his disciple. And so, much to her dismay, the leader says, well, you know, I'm not accepting disciples so much anymore. And you probably never see me, because I don't travel much anymore. And you're already married to a Prabhupada disciple. Why don't you just take instruction from your husband and just be happy with that? So she was really disappointed, but she said, okay, I guess I'll just do that. I really admire this person. I'll just follow his instruction. So she did that. But as time passes, you know, she becomes more and more fluent and steeped in Prabhupada's books, and she knows that she's supposed, it says right in Nectar of Devotion, in the first 10 items, it's all about guru-disciple, 64 principles of devotional service, and many of those are about guru and disciple. So it's really preying on her consciousness that she's not initiated. But it says, here's another thing that's going on. She contacted the Gita in the 1980s, and this is, as I said, this is a real dark period in ISKCON's history. And it also spilled over into the 90s. And so while she's chanting Hare Krishna and studying Prabhupada's books and serving with her husband in America, she begins to feel a little protected, and that she's been spared from what has been going on, that people have taken shelter of different gurus who fell by the wayside. And so she begins to think, gee, I don't know if I want to be initiated. Maybe I'll be betrayed. So she starts thinking like that. As the 90s wind down, she begins to think, I'll be darned if I'm ever going to offer incense to somebody else's picture or food. Now, at the end of the 1990s, you may remember this phenomenon called Y2K, when many people thought that the whole world was going to go up in a puff of cyber smoke due to some glitch, and the world didn't end as we know it. So she began to turn her attention again to her dilemma. And now it's really becoming intense, because on the one side of her is determined that no one's ever going to come in between me and Prabhupada, right? No one's ever going to disturb that relationship. And the other side of her is thinking, Prabhupada's telling me I got to be initiated. It's driving me crazy. So in 2003, she and her husband are at, and you notice I'm keeping this anonymous because she requested me to. Because she doesn't want to be the poster child for how to take initiation. She doesn't want people bothering her, although it's a great story. So in 2003, she and her husband are at a festival, and she's listening to a leader at the festival speak, and she's very inspired by the person. And so she says to her husband, Prabhu, we have to meet with Maharaj sometime, because I have to resolve this. This is killing me, this dilemma, this contradiction, and I'm so conflicted about this. So her husband says, okay. So he approaches the festival organizer and said, can we meet with Maharaj? My wife really is inspired by what she's heard from him, and she wants to meet with him. And so the organizer said, well, Maharaj has been traveling all over the world, and he's really tired, and he's not feeling well. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you 10 minutes. So by Krishna's mercy, she did meet with this Maharaj. 10 minutes turned into 20 minutes, turned into 30 minutes, turned into 40 minutes. And in the course of 40 minutes, this lady just revealed everything about her dilemma to the Maharaj, especially how she couldn't imagine anybody coming in between her and Prabhupada, and couldn't imagine offering incense or food or anything, but knowing that she has to take initiation. So then, what does the Maharaj say? He begins to tell her of his journey to Krishna consciousness and how long it took him to surrender to Srila Prabhupada. Now, think this is 2003, so it's been 16 years since she's read Prabhupada's Gita as it is in 1987. 16 years, and she hasn't been initiated. But she's a real good devotee, right? So he told her his story, how long it took him. And then he said to her, now what if you took initiation from someone who didn't block your relationship with Prabhupada, didn't eclipse it or obscure it, but who brought you closer to Srila Prabhupada, who enriched, enhanced, and deepened your relationship with Prabhupada? Did you ever think of that? And the lady says, I never heard that before. Wow. No wonder she's conflicted. Because today, more than ever, we know that's the very business of gurus after the founder Acharya. That's what they do. They enrich, enhance, and deepen the disciples' relationship with Prabhupada. The Ramanujis even have words for it. They say that Ramanuja, he's our Udarak. He's the main deliverer. He's the one who wrote the books we study, whose murti we worship, whose mission we prosecute. Sound familiar, right? And then all the gurus who have come after him for 1,000 years now, they just celebrated the millennial of Ramanuji. They're called Upakarak gurus. And Upakarak gurus means they're benefactor gurus. How do they benefit their disciples? They teach them how to understand Ramanuja's books, which they study every day. How to worship the Murti, how to execute the mission. And that's how the line stays together for now 1,000 years. No small potatoes, considering what we've been through for the first 50 years. So what if you took initiation from someone like that? She said, yeah, that sounds real. I never heard that. My God, the poor lady, no wonder. The guru-disciple culture in ISKCON wasn't even at that point where she had even heard of that. Although individual gurus certainly were doing it and certainly this guru was doing that. So then, yes, lo and behold, a year later, she took Diksha from this leader. And then when she told me the story in writing, she had a little epilogue, a little PS to the story. And she said, and Sureshwar Prabhu, I'm happy to say that after 7 years of being a disciple of Maharaj, not only has he kept his promise to enrich, enhance, and deepen my relationship with our founder Acharya, but now he has taken his place in my heart at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada. And I said, yes, that's parampara, that's the way it works. So it's going to be different. Now, one reason I told that story is because I know people in her God family who have totally different relationships with their spiritual master than she does. Think about it. She came to this person 16, 17 years after being steeped in Prabhupada, right? So she has a certain kind of relationship with Prabhupada and her Diksha Guru. But somebody, say, who comes in completely not knowing anything hardly about Krishna consciousness, who perhaps is introduced to Prabhupada by the person who becomes her Diksha Guru later on, that's going to be a whole different ballgame, a whole different relationship. It's going to be an authentic guru-disciple relationship, but it's just going to have a totally different mood and flavor. So nothing is stereotyped. It's all individual, it's all personal, and it's all Krishna, who is bringing us home back to Godhead in whatever way works for us and the whole parampara. Okay, we got about 10 minutes if you have any more questions in terms of those learning outcomes. Yes, Divya.
At a different temple years ago, I remember the person in charge was saying, you have to get initiated, you will make no spiritual advancement without getting initiated. And it's in the scriptures. And so this person who really wasn't qualified, was pressured in to get initiated just because he felt like, you got it right away or you make no advancement. And he took him from a whole different sampradaya just because he didn't feel qualified in our lineage.
Oh, so he didn't feel qualified in ISKCON, so he just went outside and did something else.
Right, exactly. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound right at all. I mean, how can you, and I don't know if it does say that you make no advancement without taking Diksha.
Well, there is a statement in Nectar Devotion that says, unless one receives initiation from a bona fide spiritual master, the actual connection with Krishna is never made. Now, you can't isolate that as the only statement, because of course, what qualifies us to take initiation is devotional service. And you can even read letters like, I love this letter Prabhupada wrote to a lady named Andrea Temple. She was a lady from the Bahamas who had met the devotees on the mainland and was inspired by Prabhupada's books. So she took Prabhupada's Gita back to Freeport in the Bahamas. And she was very inspired, and then she's writing letters to Prabhupada. You can read from January to March, 68, in the Vedabase. And she's just glorifying Prabhupada and just saying how inspired she is to share Prabhupada's wisdom and Krishna's wisdom to people that she knows in the Bahamas. Prabhupada's encouraging her. He says, yes, you've heard from my disciples, and now you're telling others. This is parampara. He's encouraging her that she's in the parampara. She's connected with Prabhupada through his books and the disciples, And now she's passing on the wisdom. And that was Prabhupada's mood. That said, when you are really sincere and serious, then naturally you don't avoid initiation, but all in good time, as you're ready. It took Prabhupada 11 years. It was 1933 in Allahabad. Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in 1922 in Calcutta. 11 years later in Allahabad, Prabhupada took Diksha. And you see from the history how that happened. So it is a kind of violence when people are pressured like that, because everybody's different. And Krishna knows that. He's in the heart. And he's going to bring people to him in the best way for them. And we have to play the role of encouragers. And if we sense that maybe they're avoiding the next step, then we have to find the ways and means to kick away the obstacles. We shouldn't take initiation impulsively. We shouldn't avoid it either. It should be a very natural progression. It's really important. Good. Okay, I think we're just about done. So please come next week to listen to a special kind of Guru, of Founder Acharya. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna, everybody. Welcome back to our Founder Acharya series. Srila Prabhupada, our Founder Acharya, celebrating Srila Prabhupada's transcendental position in ISKCON, as well as everyone's unique foundational relationship with him. It's Sunday, March 25th, here in Tucson, Arizona, USA. Lesson 2, the Founder Acharya Principle. In the first lesson, we looked at the Guru Principle, what a Guru is, why we need a Guru, how the Guru is one, how Gurus are different, and how all Gurus are different manifestations of the original Guru, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this lesson, we'll look at the Founder Acharya, the foundational spiritual master of all Gurus and disciples in his line. So there we have the title slide. We have Srila Vyasadeva on the left, instructing Srila Madhvacharya on the right. So although Srila Madhvacharya accepted initiation and sannyas from one Achyuta Preksha Swami, since Madhva received the most shiksha, the most instruction from Srila Vyasadeva, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur listed Madhva as Vyasa's disciple in the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta called his list the Bhagavat Parampara, a line of Bhagavat instructors. So that disciplic succession list we have in our books, that was made by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Of course, then Prabhupada became the next in line. And the point of the succession was that it's a line of instructors and instructed. It's not a line of initiators and initiated. Following Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, our Srila Prabhupada noted in 2 early letters. As you may know, Srila Prabhupada wrote thousands of letters. And especially in the early days when there were virtually no books, that was pretty much the way Prabhupada communicated with his few temples and few disciples. So when the first books came out in late 1968, Bhagavad Gita as it is in a very heavily abridged edition by Macmillan Company, and then also Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, devotees started writing Prabhupada letters because they saw this list, the disciplic succession. And they wanted to know what it was about. And so Prabhupada wrote, I'm going to cite a couple of letters. First, in this letter, Prabhupada says, and they're both written in 1969, quote, disciplic succession does not mean one has to be directly a disciple of a particular person. Now, the person writing to Prabhupada asked, how come Arjuna is not in our disciplic succession? He's the hero of the Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada wrote to him, Yes, Lord Chaitanya preached that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Arjuna accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So really, they're in the same succession in the broad sense. And then Prabhupada gave an example. It's like if you have a big tree, a big, wide, spreading oak, and you go to one part of the tree and you pluck a leaf from one side, and then you walk way over to the other side of the tree, totally different branch, and you pluck another leaf. Then Prabhupada said, and if you examine the leaves, you will see they have the same taste, the same characteristics. And then he quoted an axiom from math. He said, things equal to the same thing are equal to each other. So Arjuna accepted Krishna as Supreme Lord Chaitanya. So really, in the broadest sense, they're in the same succession. And then Prabhupada confirmed that later in 69. Prabhupada says, disciplic succession means to accept the disciplic conclusion. So it's really all about the instruction, the shiksha, the siddhanta. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta called it the Bhagavat Parampara. The Bhagavat Parampara includes both the, quote, book Bhagavat and the, quote, devotee Bhagavat, and Acharya, who teaches the book by his personal example. Prabhupada says in a purport to 10.2.31, the Acharya Sampradaya, this community of exemplars, people who live the teachings, walk the talk, practice what they preach, is strictly bona fide. Therefore, one must accept the Acharya Sampradaya. Otherwise, one's endeavor will be futile. As we'll see in this lesson, it is from the Acharya Sampradaya culture, a culture of exemplars, that the founder Acharya principle emerges in our Gaudiya Vaishnav line. Let's explore the origin and evolution of, quote, founder Acharya. Founder is an organizational word, somebody who founds or establishes or starts something. Acharya, that's more of a spiritual word. Acharya, one who teaches by example, practices what he preaches. So this is a history lesson, the evolution of the phrase and the concept in our Gaudiya Sampradaya since the time of Lord Chaitanya. Raise your hand if you know who they are.
Six Goswamis.
Everyone knows the six Goswamis. And it was the six Goswamis who planted the first seed of the founder Acharya phrase by doing something very interesting. Within a dozen years after the disappearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in 1534, who worshipped the king of all the devotees in the whole world, or you could say the whole universe, Vishva, and that was what they called their Sangha, because Lord Chaitanya left in 1534, and by somewhere in the 1540s, they had established this kind of organization. Maybe not in today's sense of some corporate legal thing, but they had an organized Sangha based on discussing and propagating the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So the Sabha thus planted the organizational seed for the founder Acharya phrase. Next we will examine a philosophical seed. Okay, that's a painting. It's a depiction of Srila Rupa Goswami. So 1540s, the Sabha started, and in the early 1550s, Prabhupada mentions 1552, Rupa Goswami did something. Ernesto?
In his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami identified the fourth principle of devotional service as Sadhu Vartmanu Vartanam, which Srila Prabhupada later translated in the Nectar of Devotion as following in the footsteps of great acharyas, teachers, under the direction of the spiritual master.
Right, Rupa Goswami made a philosophical distinction between great acharyas and regular gurus, which Prabhupada also mentions in the introduction to Nectar of Devotion. In our mental activities, we should always try to think of Krishna and try to plan how to please him, following in the footsteps of the great acharyas and the personal spiritual master. So that's I call it a philosophical seed of founder Acharya. There's gurus and there are gurus, as we learned in lesson 1. Observation. As a child may see his parents as everything at first, then matures to see them in perspective, so a disciple may see his spiritual parents and relatives, his diksha and shiksha gurus, as everything at first, then matures under their guidance to appreciate them in relation to, quote, the great acharyas. Now let's look at how one famous disciple saw his great initiating guru in relation to an even greater acharya. So far we have an organizational seed, the sabha, and then we have the philosophical seed, great acharya, regular gurus, and now we're going to have a kind of, I call it a cultural seed. So 1540s, the sabha, 1550s, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and this is a depiction of Srila Narottam Das Thakur, who circa 1560, most scholars agree, completed a famous song collection. It's called Prarthana, and some of the songs we sing every day. At the very least, we sing in Guru Puja, Sri Guru Charana Padma. When someone disappears, we sing Yeya Nilo Premadana, that's from Prarthana. So Narottam Das Thakur, he came from a privileged background. He was the son of a king. And he went to Vrindavan and became one of the prominent Shiksha disciples of Srila Jiva Goswami. Jiva Goswami had many disciples, and three of them were very prominent. There was Narottam, Shyamananda, and Srinivas. So Jiva Goswami noticed that one of his prized pupils, Narottam, he was a good student, and they had a close Shiksha relationship. But Sri Jiva noticed that Narottam had really given his heart to another sannyasi named Lokanath Goswami. So Jiva said, Narottam, I want you to approach Lokanath for initiation. Now, they knew, both of them knew, and everyone knew, that Lokanath Goswami, after Mahaprabhu disappeared in the 1530s, was so disturbed that he withdrew and made a vow that he wasn't going to accept disciples. So Narottam approached him, knowing this, and sure enough, Lokanath Goswami said, I'm sorry, I cannot accept disciples, so you must go elsewhere. But Narottam had already given his heart to Lokanath. And that really is the essence of initiation, where there's a change of heart. So Narottam, internally, he said, okay, Guru Maharaj has not accepted me, but I'm going to serve him in a menial way, actually, because I know I'm a little proud of my aristocratic background. So Narottam made a vow that every morning before Lokanath did his morning ablutions, answered the call of nature and then bathed, he would clean the place. He would make it all nice, make the earth nice and the water nice, and make it very clean and peaceful. And then Lokanath Goswami, the first morning he went, he noticed, but he was so renounced and detached from the world that he was like, I'm just going to go on and do my bhajan. So he did that. Now this went on for over a year. So finally, after a year, Lokanath Goswami thought to himself, I'm supposed to be a renunciate, and I'm accepting service from somebody every day. This has got to stop. So he decided one morning to go to the spot earlier to find out who it was. He hid behind a tree. It says in the Narottam Vilas. And then in the half moonlight, Narottam approached to do his seva for his internal guru. But then Lokanath saw somebody approaching and called out, who is there? And so Narottam knew, I've been found out. So he came into the presence of Lokanath and fell flat at his feet. Please, Maharaj, you must accept me as your disciple. There's no meaning to my life unless you accept me. No, I have made this vow, I cannot accept you. But Lokanath Mahaprabhu came to him and said, you must accept this one disciple. Now, in Prarthana, in his song collection, Song 17, Divya, want to read that?
In his Prarthana collection, Srila Narottam Das Thakur wrote in the fourth verse of Psalm 17 a song to Srila Rupa Goswami.
So I'm going to read the Bengali and you're going to read the English. This is a song to Rupa Goswami by Narottam. And it says, Prabhu Lokanatha Kabe Sangelonya Jabe Shri Rupera Parapadme More Samarpibe. And it means,
when will my Lord and Master Lokanath Goswami take me with him and place me at the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami?
Prabhu Lokanath, when will my Prabhu, my Lord and Master Lokanath Goswami, take me with him and place me at the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami? Despite being the only Diksha disciple of Sri Lokanath Goswami, Narottam prayed to his master to bring him to Rupa Goswami. Now, who was Srila Rupa Goswami in relationship to both Lokanath and Narottam? Well, let's find out from Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada identifies Srila Rupa Goswami for us in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela, chapter 5, text 203, purport. Quote, Srila Rupa Goswami is described as the Bhakti Rasacharya, or one who knows the essence of devotional service. His famous book, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, is the science of devotional service, and by reading this book, one can understand the meaning of devotional service. So Srila Rupa Goswami was neither the eldest of the Goswamis, nor was he famous as being the most renounced like Raghunath Das, nor the most prolific writer like Srila Jiva, or the most senior like Sanatan Goswami. But as soon as his book, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, was published, everyone recognized that this is our chief, because he's the most expert in relishing the mellows, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, of devotional service. So the word founder Acharya wasn't in India then, because there was no English people there yet. It was just Bengali in Bengal. So Narottam is writing this song and he's asking, when will my Diksha Guru take me with him and place me at the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami? As Narottam Das Thakur's Diksha Guru, Lokanath Goswami had the honor of bringing his great and only disciple closer to their Rasacharya, Srila Rupa Goswami. This song by Narottam Das Thakur thus planted a cultural seed of founder Acharya. Because Lokanath Goswami, being the spiritual master of Narottam, knew that it was his privilege, his honor, his duty to enrich his disciples' foundational relationship with their foundational guru. The line was called Sri Vishva Vaishnav Raj Sabha. So there we have a kind of cultural seed of founder Acharya based on the writing of Narottam and the good shepherding of Narottam closer to Srila Rupa Goswami. So that all happened in pretty short order after Mahaprabhu's disappearance in 1534. We have the organizational seed, we have the philosophical seed, and the cultural seed, all happening in about 15 years' time, say 1545 to 1560. We're going to have to fast forward the clock now over 300 years to find the next seeds, because by Mahaprabhu's will, the Bhakti Renaissance that he started in the 16th century, he allowed it to be completely eclipsed by so many imposter bhakti groups. He allowed his Renaissance to be disgraced, driven underground, and we'll see why later. It wasn't until Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur came on the scene in the 19th century, who single-handedly revived true bhakti and exposed all the imposter sampradayas, that we get more seeds of the founder Acharya principle. More than 300 years after the planting of the organizational, philosophical, and cultural seeds of founder Acharya, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur planted the phrase, his literary seeds, in his Hari Nama Chintamani. So this must have been one of the last books that Thakur wrote, because he wrote it in 1900. And the Thakur wrote in Bengali, he wrote in Hindi, he wrote in Sanskrit, he wrote in English. He was so brilliant. And he wrote about 100 books. amazing, very prolific author. But he wrote Harinama Chintamani, which freely translated means the touchstone of the holy name. Only the Bengali Vaishnavas had access to this book for quite a while. So you may wonder, what are Founder Acharya's seeds doing in a book about the holy name? Well, there's a part of the book where it talks about the 10 offenses to the holy name. And one of the offenses is Guru Ravagya, disobeying the spiritual master, disregarding him, thinking he's an ordinary person. And so in chapter 6 of Harinama Chintamani, I'm going to show you some literary seeds of the Founder Acharya principle. And then later in the lesson, I'll show you how those seeds blossomed as the actual Founder Acharya equivalent word in Bengali. Let's go to that. Damodar?
In his Bengali work, Harinam Chintamani, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur sowed the literary seeds of the future English-Sanskrit phrase Founder Acharya in chapter 6, disregarding the Guru.
I'll do the Bengali, you do the English. I'm planning different phrases from the verses, and then later on, when we put them all together as the verses, then we'll see how the Founder Acharya emerges. Sampradaye Radigurur.
The original guru of the Sampradaya.
Who's the original guru of our Sampradaya? Brahma, right? Shiksha Guru Pratishtita.
A Sampradaya's instructing gurus.
Right. Srila Prabhupada, for example, was always referring to the previous acharyas, Ramanuja, Madhva, Vishnu Swami, Nimbarka. Adyacharya Yanihi.
One who's the original acharya of a Sampradaya branch.
And you'll see later how this word actually is the exact Bengali equivalent of Founder Acharya. Adyacharya. And finally, Guru Shiromani.
The crest jewel of all the gurus.
Okay, so take that in, and then later on we're going to see it in full, glorious translation. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he single-handedly revived Lord Chaitanya's movement, at least philosophically, but he knew he didn't have time to manifest it as an actual movement, although he envisioned how it had to be. For example, in Lord Chaitanya's time, there was this prediction, Pritivitayachayata Nagarati Gram, Sarvatra Prachar Haibe Moranam. In as many towns and villages as there are on the surface of the earth, my holy name will be preached, Lord Chaitanya predicted. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he wanted to get that going. For hundreds of years, that prophecy was lying fallow. It wasn't manifesting. So he envisioned a whole worldwide movement of many gurus working cooperatively in a global organization. It was Bhaktivinoda Thakur who envisioned that to really make this well organized and effective, you're going to need a governing body. And he got that phrase, GBC, Governing Body Commission, from the Indian railway system that the British had installed in India. They had a GBC. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur appropriated that for his vision of a worldwide organization. That's at the global level. He took it all the way down to the local level, to the Namhatta and the Bhakti Vriksha levels. Great visionary. But he knew his time was running out, so he prayed famously for a ray of Vishnu to come into the family who could actually take the movement to the next step. And sure enough, Bimal Prasad Dutt came into the family in February 1874, and he became Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he actually started an organization per his father's vision and Lord Chaitanya's prediction. The effective founding of the Gaudiya Math, the Gaudiya mission, happened the day that Siddhanta Saraswati took sannyas, which he did mystically from a picture of his Guru Maharaj, Gorkisore Das Babaji, who had passed away in 1915. And he had just completed his vrat, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, of chanting 1 billion names. He wanted to do some tapas to get some empowerment to do this mission, so he chanted 1 billion names. It took him 9 years to complete this jaga. And then at the completion, he sat down in front of a picture of Srila Gorkisore Das Babaji and accepted the renounced order of life from the picture, not to be imitated. If you're a ray of Vishnu, you can imitate that. And that was the effective beginning And then it started growing and growing in the 1920s. And then in 1927, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta decided to revive his father's journal. Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur had done a journal for over 20 years in Bengali called Sri Sajjana Toshini, which means for the satisfaction of the Vaishnavas. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta coined an English title, The Harmonist. And the first issue appears to have been an annual, June 27 to May 28. But as time went on, it increased. I think it became a monthly. Ernest, you want to read that?
The English Sanskrit phrase Founder Acharya first appeared in The Harmonist, the English journal of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Gaudiya Math.
It was in Sajjana Toshini that Srila Bhaktivinoda predicted that someone would come and spread the teachings all over the world, an empowered personality. But his son was very empowered, and he at least revived the movement in an organized way throughout the subcontinent of India. So many mutts, 64 Gaudiya mutts, thousands of disciples. And it was in the October 1930 issue of The Harmonist that the Founder Acharya phrase appeared. The Harmonist is identifying Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as the Founder Acharya of the Gaudiya Math. Ernesto, why don't you read from here down to limbs.
The Gaudiya Math is also identical with its founder Acharya. The associates, followers, and abode of his divine grace are limbs of himself. None of them claim to be anything but a fully subordinate limb of this single individual. This unconditional, causeless, spontaneous submission to the head is found to be not only compatible with, but absolutely necessary for the fullest freedom of initiative of the subordinate limbs.
So the editor is saying that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he's the life and soul of the mission. We're all his assistants, like Prabhupada told us later, ISKCON is my body. You're all the limbs of my body, like that. Same idea. So that was where the phrase first appeared, finally, after the concept developing for hundreds of years. The next reference to Founder Acharya appears 3 years later in a book called Sri Krishna Chaitanya, a book by a Gaudiya Math scholar, Professor Nishikant Sanyal. What happened was, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was preparing some of his sannyasis to go to the West. And they did in the early 1930s. But he didn't want them to go unless and until there was a book. In the early 1930s, before Srila Bhaktisiddhanta sent some of his learned sannyasis to preach abroad, he commissioned his scholarly disciple, Professor Nishikant Sanyal, to compile a book about the life and teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The book was written with the gravity and sophistication required to impress the intelligentsia of the West. It was a projected trilogy. The first volume came to completion in manuscript form. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta took that manuscript, and for 2 months he sat down and he edited the book. So the book is by Sanyal, but it's edited by Siddhanta Saraswati, so it's very bona fide. And in this book, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Sanyal made explicit what was only implicit in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Harinama Chintamani. The strong connection between what Sanyal calls the prehistorical originators of the 4 Vaishnava Sampradayas, Lord Shiva, the 4 Kumaras, Lakshmi, and Lord Brahma, and the historical reinvigorators of those spiritual lineages for our Kali age, who became the founder acharyas of those sampradayas later on in the Kali Yuga. Let's see how that works on the screen. Divya, want to read?
The systems of Sri Vishnu Swami, Sri Nimbarka, Sri Ramanuja, and Sri Madhva are connected with the ancient times by the recognition of the remote authority of eternal ancient teachers, namely Lakshmi, Brahma, Rudra, and the 4 Kumaras, respectively. The 4 founder acharyas of the Iron Age, profess to preach the views of those original teachers of the religion.
Right. So Sanyal is making very explicit what Srila Bhaktivinoda had only hinted at in Harinama Chintamani. So let's see how that looks. So there's Lord Shiva, and then in the Kali Yuga, his most powerful representative of his line is Vishnu Swami. The four Kumaras, Sri Nimbarka Acharya. Lakshmi, in our Kali Yuga, the founder Acharya, the one who reinvigorated that line, took it in a new direction, was Ramanuja. And in our Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, Madhvacharya. There he is. Looks like he's flashing the peace sign or the victory sign. What is he doing there? He's distinguishing. It's not all one, there's two. There's Ishwara, Supreme Controller, and then there's Jiva. He was on a crusade, really, against impersonalism. Note that the philosophy connected with each founder Acharya identifies a particular aspect of the relationship between the Lord and his energies. So you see these technical Sanskrit terms. Shuddha Dvaita, Dvaita Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita, and Dvaita. They're all correct, but as Professor Sanyal pointed out in his book, they're not complete. Let's see how that works. In 1890, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote another famous Bengali work. It's called Sri Navadvip Dham Mahatmya. It's a very visionary work. In the book, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he has Lord Nityananda giving Srila Jiva Goswami a guided tour of Navadvip. And then at one point in the book, it's revealed that before any of these founder acharyas appeared, Lord Chaitanya appeared to each one of them. And Lord Chaitanya revealed to each of them that later on he was going to appear as the Yuga avatar, and he was going to preach a philosophy that was going to synthesize all the elements from what they preached. And so here's how it sounds in Navadvip Dham Mahatmya. Quote, from Madhva, the Lord said, he would accept Madhva's complete defeat of the Mayavad philosophy and Madhva's service to the deity of Krishna. From Ramanuja, the Lord said he would accept the concept of bhakti unpolluted by karma and jnana, as well as service to the devotees. From Vishnu Swami's teachings, the Lord said he would accept the sentiment of exclusive dependence on Krishna, plus the path of raga bhakti, spontaneous devotion. And from Nimbarka, the Lord would embrace the necessity of taking shelter of Srimati Radharani and the high esteem for the gopis' love of Krishna. So Lord Chaitanya appeared to those founder acharyas. Now when Sanyal wrote his book, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Sanyal had read that Navadvip Dham Mahatmya and had read Harinama Chintamani because he was also Bengali Vaishnava. So inspired by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Navadvip Dham Mahatmya, Professor Sanyal noted in Sri Krishna Chaitanya that each philosophy of the four Vaishnava founder acharyas, while sound, nevertheless they're incomplete. But the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya, however, quote, reconciles, harmonizes, and perfects the four founder acharya philosophies by presenting Achintya Beda Beda Tattva, the inconceivable, simultaneous oneness and difference of the Lord and his energies. They're describing an aspect of the relationship between the Lord and his energies. And Mahaprabhu's giving the complete synthesis. There's a oneness and there's a difference between the Lord and his energies. The next slide identifies the foundational role founder acharyas play in their disciplic successions. So there are these famous acharyas. In 2017 we had big celebration in Sri Rangam because it was not the centennial but the millennial of Sri Ramanuja. He was born in 1017. He left in 1137. He lived 120 years, pretty long. And ISKCON took part in a lot of those festivities because they appreciate Prabhupada's preaching, ISKCON's preaching. So, providing the core identity and foundational relationship for all generations of their followers. Sri Ramanujacharya and Srila Madhvacharya are outstanding examples of the preeminent position of the founder Acharya in the Guru Parampara. For example, in the Ramanuja branch of the Sri or Lakshmi Sampradaya, serious followers still introduce themselves thus. If you meet a Ramanuji in South India and you ask him who he is, "Oh my good sir, who are you?" He might say in Tamil, "Adiyan, Ramanuja, Dasan. I am your servant, the servant of Ramanuja." Now Ramanuja appeared 1,000 years ago, but he's still identifying himself as a Ramanuji. Why? Because it is Ramanuja's Mahagranthas, great books, that they study, his Murti that they worship, and his mission that they execute. Sound familiar? Every day we're studying Prabhupada's books, we're worshipping his Murti, we're executing his ISKCON mission. Firmly grounded in Ramanuja as their foundational spiritual master, in 2017 the Ramanujis celebrated their founder Acharya's millennial, the 1000th anniversary of his appearance in 1017 Common Era. And it's the same thing in Udupi. Because I was living not far from Udupi, I did find some Madhvites who spoke English, and that's how they'd identify themselves. They still have Madhva's seat in the temple on which he sat and discoursed on the Bhagavatam. They worship that seat. That's part of their daily puja. And they, yes, I am Madhvite, and here's my beloved Diksha Guru and my beloved Shiksha Gurus. But the core identity is drawn from the founder Acharya. So for ISKCON, we may note with profit how the Ramanujis and Madhvas have survived and thrived over the centuries by honoring their founder Acharya as their foundational relationship and core identity. And think about it, those lines, they're very regional. Since Prabhupada did what he did, sometimes they do venture across the sea. We're global. So how much more do we need to get it? Because our diversity is mind-boggling. It cuts across all ethnic, religious, political, ethnic backgrounds. To stay together, we have plenty of diversity. We could use some more unity. So in our Gaudiya Sampradaya, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Harinama Chintamani offers conclusive statements about the unique position of the founder Acharya. Let's go back to those verses in Harinama Chintamani and see how they sound when the words are put together in translation. Damodar?
Srila Bhaktivinoda's founder Acharya seeds in full bloom.
Okay, seeds in full bloom. Here you go, I'll do the Bengali.
One should first of all accept the instructions of the
Sampradaya Radigurur.
The original guru of a sampradaya.
Okay, so we do accept Brahma, for example.
And behave accordingly. In a disciplic succession of Vaishnavas, the previous acharyas are established respectfully as
Shiksha Guru Pratishtita.
Instructing gurus for the sampradaya.
So we accept our previous acharyas, Prabhupada's always quoting them. And now, here it is.
However, the
Adyacharya,
the founder acharya, or original guru of a disciplic line, is appropriately worshipped and respected as the
Guru Shiromani.
The topmost crown jewel of the spiritual master.
Okay, so there's the word. Adi, it's two words. Adi, original. Acharya, teacher by example. So the founder, the Adi, the one who starts it. And as we saw in lesson 3, when Prabhupada came to America, becoming the founder Acharya of a new branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya was really the furthest thing from his mind. He was intending to revive the Gaudiya mission as he knew it from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and certainly when he did start a fresh branch and did separate himself from the mess that the Gaudiya Math had become and started ISKCON, he was in fact reviving the Gaudiya Sampradaya. Okay, continue.
His perfect philosophical conclusions are to be followed by all in a succession. Any contrary instructions will not be accepted.
If we're true to our founder Acharya, from whom we draw our core identity and spiritual self-esteem, we measure all teachers and teachings through the lens of his teachings, not the other way around. Okay, so there are the literary seeds in full bloom. And now, to end the lesson, I'm going to draw heavily on some research that was done by His Holiness Shivaram Swami, who wrote a book in 1999. He was really trying to help ISKCON recover from the whole Zonal Acharya era, which placed this fanatic spotlight just on the Diksha Guru to the expense of our Shiksha culture, what to speak of at the expense of Srila Prabhupada's position. And so he wrote a book called The Shiksha Guru in 1999, and he studied the Harinama Chintamani to do research for the book, and he noted Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's emphasis he placed on the founder Acharya, the Adyacharya. Maharaj made a note of characteristics of a founder Acharya, and here we'll take a look at those characteristics to end the lesson. So, how about Ernesto, Prabhu?
Possesses great spiritual strength.
Yes, possesses great spiritual strength. Since we're getting close now to lesson 3, which is really all about how our Prabhupada fulfilled the role of founder Acharya like no one else has. We'll give examples from Prabhupada's Leela to illustrate these characteristics. Possesses great spiritual strength. We could have been Prabhupada's grandchildren. We couldn't keep up with him. Non-stop, 24/7, undivided, unalloyed, pure devotional service. So where did that strength come from? It came from his love for Krishna and for his spiritual master and for all living beings. So when you're situated on the highest levels of Krishna Prem, it just fills you with such spiritual power. Even they say in the material world, love can move mountains. What to speak of the highest levels of Krishna Prem. So great spiritual strength. Next.
His teachings take precedence over all others and are compulsory for his followers.
Precedence. It's a tricky word because when someone is so empowered that they can take the teachings of the Sampradaya and reinvigorate the whole line with his realizations, but he doesn't think he's surpassed the previous acharyas. He simply knows that by the grace of his Guru Maharaj and the previous acharyas, he's being empowered to do amazing things. So again, his teachings become the lens through which we see all other teachers and teachings. Okay, let's look at another characteristic of a founder acharya.
Holds a unique post.
Unique post. You don't replace a founder acharya. He only lives some time, of course. But then he lives forever by his teachings. He lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. And everybody for all time is using his spoken and written word as the measure of truth. So sometimes people say, what does that mean? We'll never see another Nityasiddha, Mahabhagavat, Shaktivesh avatar. So I always say, yeah, bring them on. We could use some of those people. But you know what? If they come into the Hare Krishna movement sometime in the future, what will they do? They'll be very happy to cooperate. They'll just do amazing things. And even in our time, we see devotees, some of them are doing amazing preaching. But there's no need to replace the founder acharya. The founder acharya is the pivotal person around whom everyone revolves and keeps the sampradaya together. So holds a unique post, one of a kind.
Is the acharya or leader of all Vaishnavas even when physically present?
Yeah, even when physically present, because when someone is so empowered, sometimes they appear to be ahead of their time and they're misunderstood. And even in Prabhupada's time, because he was doing such amazing preaching, some of the people who were responsible for the breakup of the Gaudiya mission, they were trying to find fault with it. And to protect ISKCON and tell the history and keep us from repeating the same mistakes, Prabhupada had to say and write some pretty heavy things about what happened. So there was some tension between Prabhupada and the God Brothers. But in Prabhupada's last year, 1977, he was simply in the mood of an Uttamadhikari who sees everyone serving Krishna except him, because the humility is so extreme. So one fine day, as he was lying on his bed, some weeks before he left this world, Srila Prabhupada said to Bhakti True Maharaj, "Call all my godbrothers, I must apologize to them." So a lot of them came to Prabhupada's bedside. And there was one Ashram Maharaj. And Prabhupada said, "Please forgive me, I am an offender. I am Mahapatita. I am greatly fallen." So Ashram Maharaj said, "Oh no, you're not greatly fallen. You're Mahapatita Pavana. You're the savior of the greatly fallen. You picked up so many lost people all over the world. Malechas, Yavanas, Videshis, people who would never become devotees." And then Prabhupada was still insisting in his humility. He said, "No, I became proud. So many disciples, so many followers, so much Lakshmi came, so many temples. I became proud of my opulence." So Ashram Maharaj said, No, you didn't become proud. It's just that you were so empowered. Lakshmi was following you around like your maidservant. She was providing all opulence. That wealth that eluded Prabhupada in his younger days, he had this strategy of trying to do the mission with accumulated wealth because it was predicted he would be wealthy. Krishna didn't let that manifest until later because he wanted to make Prabhupada wealthy spiritually. Prabhupada could travel anywhere in the world, so many books published. But why was he so inspirational? Because he didn't waste a second, didn't spend a penny on himself. So it made his followers, it made us want to do anything, way beyond our capacity. Even when physically present, there was a reconciliation at the end of Prabhupada's life with the God brothers. And
awards power of attorney to his followers who strictly adhere to his teachings.
As Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur pointed out, you can know how empowered a Vaishnava is by how many others he turns to devotional service to Krishna. Prabhupada initiated about 4,800 people, not even 5,000. And he continues to inspire so many people, and he's empowering everybody to become Krishna conscious. We're all acting as his representatives now. And this continues to go on in the changing times. So it's a kind of insult when people say, "Oh, Prabhupada's the only guru." No, he empowered so many people to act as guru. He remains the founder Acharya of the ISKCON branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. Okay, the next lesson will be lesson 3, transition. Having looked at the origin, characteristics, and historical development of the founder Acharya principle, we are now ready to examine how our Srila Prabhupada emerged as the founder Acharya of a fresh branch of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, ISKCON. Okay, so now when you ask your questions, try to focus them in terms of these lesson outcomes. By the end of the lesson, students will be able to identify organizational, philosophical, cultural, and literary seeds of the founder Acharya principle as they appeared over time in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. We should be able to recount how the founder Acharya phrase finally manifested in the 1930s, identify the foundational role of the founder Acharya in the Vaishnava Sampradayas, and finally, we should be able to identify symptoms of a founder Acharya noted in the Harinama Chintamani. Are there any questions? Ernesto?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that Lord Chaitanya appeared to all the teachers. Now today, after this synthesis took place, they were able to get a complete picture of the teachings and philosophy. These other sampradayas, did they accept it?
More and more, since Prabhupada's amazing taking the teachings all over the world, there is appreciation. If you go to Udupi, they really like ISKCON because Madhva's on this crusade against Mayavad. It's 2, it's not all 1. So they know Prabhupada's pranam mantra is Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarne. You've gone to the Western countries and then all over the world to dispel impersonalism and voidism. So they really like that. And Sri Rangam, we were invited to go to their millennial of Ramanuja. Now we have ISKCON by Srila Prabhupada's grace, and we're positioned very auspiciously to take Mahaprabhu's prediction, and it's happening. Prabhupada, 14 times in 12 years, he traveled all over the world. Then he left it to us to take it to every town and village. Yeah. Damodar.
You said that Bhaktivinoda Thakur kind of wrapped up his literary efforts around 1900. When did he start?
Yeah, the earliest I'm aware of is 1871. 1871, he also wrote that famous poem, "Alas for those who spend their days in festive mirth and joy, the dazzling, deadly liquid forms their hearts for air employ. The shining bottles charm their eyes and draw their hearts' embrace. The slaves of wine can never rise from what we call disgrace." It's called Saragrahi Vaishnav. Saragrahi means a Vaishnav who knows the essence of everything. He's describing the fall and the redemption of the jiva. Alas for those who spend their days, people who become victims of their senses. It's about a 23 stanza poem, and right around somewhere in the teens, this fall, the guy hits bottom, and then he meets a pure devotee of the Lord, and then he starts coming up. And then by the end of the poem, here's how the Thakur ends it. O Saragrahi Vaishnav soul, thou art an angel fair. Lead me on to Vrindavan. Let spirit's power declare. There rests my soul from matter free upon my lover's arms. Eternal peace and spirit's love are all my chanting charms. Bhaktivinoda Thakur with the America the Beautiful melody. You know why? Because the Thakur, he wrote in a very popular meter of the day. 19th century, Emily Dickinson wrote most of her poems in this meter. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. Iambic tetrameter and iambic trimeter. It's like a ballad meter. So he wrote this poem. He was Western educated, and he knew these poets. And so he did it better. He did it for Krishna. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was the original bridge preacher. In 1896, he did send an English copy of Sri Chaitanya, His Life and Precepts. He sent it to Emerson, Harvard, Australia, England. Yeah, the Thakur, he was the connection between Lord Chaitanya and the West, and trying to get this prophecy going in every town and village all over the world. So now that we've laid the groundwork of Guru Tattva and then a special kind of Guru, Founder Acharya Tattva, the Founder Acharya principle, now we're ready to take a look at our Prabhupada, who fulfilled that role of Founder Acharya like no one ever has that we know, by the grace of Mahaprabhu and the previous Acharyas and his Guru Maharaj. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Welcome back everyone to Srila Prabhupada, our Founder Acharya. Lesson 3 of our 10-part series. You see it has the same title as the whole series, Srila Prabhupada, our Founder Acharya. Here we are, Easter Sunday, auspicious day. In Lesson 2, we examined the Founder Acharya principle, its origin and historical development. In this lesson, we'll look at our own Founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, and how he realized and revealed his position as a service to his Guru Maharaj, to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and to all generations of his followers. So the title slide of the seminar is Prabhupada at Bhaktivedanta Manor, summer 1973. And my godbrother Bhargava Prabhu captured Prabhupada in many moods that summer. Here Prabhupada appears to be graciously accepting perhaps a toy from a little girl. She looks to be around maybe 4 years old. So why did I have this as the title slide? Because the child in the front of this slide is as eligible to have a foundational relationship with Srila Prabhupada as is Prabhupada's Diksha disciple in the background, That's Srimati Himavati Mataji, my god sister, initiated disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Now this little girl, if she's still with us, is going to be, say, in her late 40s. So she definitely didn't take initiation from Srila Prabhupada during his time with us on earth. But remember from the first 2 lessons that Prabhupada offers himself as being our core identity, our foundational relationship for all generations of his followers. Sometimes when I teach this series, at this point I ask everyone to either speak or at least think about, if someone asked you, what is your relationship with Srila Prabhupada today? How would you answer, say, in 108 words or less? And it doesn't mean how I came to Krishna consciousness, which is what we always want to do, but it means just in a few words, how would you describe that? And then I always start the ball rolling by saying, my relationship with Srila Prabhupada is as his Shiksha follower. Okay, Prabhupada initiated me on Saturday, July 17th, 1971 in Detroit, Michigan. That's not my core identity. My core identity is that I am his instructed follower. And incidentally, I'm his initiated disciple. Why do I say that? Because that core identity of being Prabhupada's instructed follower is available to everyone. As long as there's an ISKCON Sangha, everyone can share that core identity as being Prabhupada's instructed follower. And yes, seniors instruct juniors, and then the juniors become the seniors, and on the disciplic succession goes. But Prabhupada, he's the one that provides the unity amidst our worldwide diversity. At the end of the seminars, I'd like to ask you again, what is your core relationship? And see how our journey from the spiritual masters all the way through to your Srila Prabhupada, as the last lesson is called, how the journey has influenced, I hope favorably, your relationship. Now we're going to look at prophecies, both Puranic and Gaudiya, that Srila Prabhupada fulfilled. There's Prabhupada, probably at Tompkins Square Park, although the very first Sankirtan we were reading was at Washington Square Park. There, Srila Prabhupada, he didn't even have a mridanga, he was just playing on a little tom-tom that somebody donated at 26 2nd Avenue. And there's Bruce and Chuck, who became Brahmananda and Achyutananda. And that's how it started in the 60s, 1966. Who knows? Most devotees don't know this, although some do. It's a matter of public record, it's no secret, but because it's very old, most don't know this. And the key word in the question I'm going to ask is Puranic, not Gaudiya, Puranic. Who knows the 5,000-year-old Puranic prophecy Srila Prabhupada fulfilled? Raise your hand if you know. It was published in 1996 is when I first saw it, when Prabhupada's centennial year happened. That was the first time we had a big, giant Vyasa Puja book for Srila Prabhupada. So in his introduction to that centennial Vyasa Puja book, because Lokanath Maharaj, he was the centennial minister, he wrote an introduction to the book presenting prophecies that Prabhupada fulfilled based on research by ISKCON scholars that they had done, both in the Puranas and in our own Gaudiya heritage. The background is that it's 5,000 years ago, and Krishna is about to leave the planet. He hasn't left yet. And Ganga Devi, the goddess Ganga, in her foresight, actually she has also been approached by other holy rivers. They can see that once Krishna leaves the planet, all hell is going to break loose because Kali Yuga will come in full force. So, Ganga Devi says to Krishna, "O Lord, we can see that your pastimes are about to end, and people are becoming more and more materialistic. You have been very merciful to us. After you leave, however, all the sinful people of Kali Yuga will bathe in our waters, and we will become overwhelmed with sinful reactions. Smiling, the Lord replied, be patient. Yes?
After 5,000 years, my mantra, Upasaka, worshipper of the holy name, will appear in this world and spread the chanting of my holy name everywhere.
Not only, and then Krishna continues, not only in Bharatvarsh, but also all over the world, people will chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And because the devotees of Lord Hari are so pure, anyone who contacts them will become purified from sinful reactions. So the mantra Upasaka is going to inspire so many people to chant Hare Krishna. And then Krishna says, these pure devotees will visit Bharatvarsha and purify you, Ganga Devi, of sinful reactions by bathing in your sacred waters. So, that's extraordinary. She's complaining that I'm going to be contaminated by so many sinful reactions, and Krishna says, no, don't worry, because my mantra Upasaka is going to inspire so many people to take up pure devotional service, and they're going to come and visit your holy waters, and they're going to purify you by bathing in your sacred waters. Now, here's the line that Prabhupada told us. He didn't tell us all of that backstory. He told us only this line. And most devotees know this. This period of worldwide chanting of Hare Krishna will continue for 10,000 years. So my question to you is, why didn't Prabhupada tell us the backstory? Raise your hand. Why didn't he contextualize that whole prediction? Any ideas?
I'm just going to say he didn't want to be like a self-proclaimed kind of...
Right. Because if he told us the story, we would have said, oh, you're the mantra Upasaka.
Right.
All glories to you. But our founder Acharya was always pointing people to Krishna and never pointing people to himself, because he was absolutely transparent to Krishna, transparent via medium. There was no hint of desire for profit or adoration or distinction getting in the way of the message. So that's right in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana. Admittedly, when it was published in the book, if you actually go online and you look up Brahma Vaivarta Purana, you can see from not only 50-51, it's about a 10-verse series. You can see how the translator has perhaps embellished it a little. And some scholars even argue that the mantra Upasaka is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because he was the one that really brought back the chanting from the Upanishads. But even if you say it's Mahaprabhu, who actually did it? Who did Mahaprabhu leave the task to? Srila Prabhupada. But there's another prophecy that was only 500 years old, and a lot of devotees know this one. And it's a similar situation. Just as Ganga Devi was really worried about what's going to happen in this Kali Yuga, so Narada Muni also was very worried. And he can go anywhere. He can go anywhere in the spiritual or material world. So he went right to Golok Navdvip, where Lord Chaitanya is eternally performing his Sankirtan pastimes. And he said in so many words, he said, this Kali Yuga is going to be so bad, what do we do to help these poor people? So in the Sri Chaitanya Mangala, here's the Gaudiya scripture, by Srila Lochan Das Thakur, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tells Narada Muni, who is anxious about the suffering in the Kali Yuga, quote, with the powerful chopper of Nam Sankirtan, I will cut the hard knots of demoniac desires from the hearts of everyone. So he doesn't chop people's bodies up, he doesn't kill them, but he kills the demoniac desires. And then Mahaprabhu said, Yadi papi chari dharma dure deshe yoy mora senapati bhakta yai behe tatoy. Who would like to read?
Even if the sinners reject religion or flee to foreign countries, I will send Mon Senapati Bhakta, my military field commander, to go there and deliver them.
Yes, and when Prabhupada was walking among us, he was very much the military field commander. He would even use military images. He even said in one Gita purport, one should practice Krishna consciousness, as if in military discipline. Prabhupada, he just held his head high, and wherever he went, he just charged on all around the world. And we were following behind him. Very much the military field commander, Senapati Bhakta. Now more devotees know the next one, because it's only about less than 140 years old. Who knows the late 19th century prophecy Prabhupada fulfilled? Raise your hand. Bhaktivinoda Thakur's prophecy. Let's take a look. Want to read?
Personality will soon appear in order to preach the teachings of Sri Chaitanya and move unrestrictedly over the whole world with his message.
Yes, that was roughly 1885. He not only spoke it, but he published it. And so, echoing Bhaktivinoda's prophecy, Srila Prabhupada once reflected, because Prabhupada had a keen sense of history. Quote, he, 1896, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, wanted to introduce this Krishna consciousness movement by sending this book, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his life and precepts. Fortunately, that was my birth year, and by Krishna's arrangement, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and I came in contact. I was born in a different family. My Guru Maharaj was born in a different family. Who knew that I will come to his protection? Who knew that I would come in America? Who knew that you American boys will come to me? These are all Krishna's arrangement. Having heard prophecies Prabhupada fulfilled, we will now look at how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu set the world stage over 5 centuries to send his Senapati Bhakta, his military field commander, to just the right place at just the right time to launch the Krishna consciousness movement worldwide. So, how did Lord Chaitanya set the world stage for Srila Prabhupada's advent? Lord Chaitanya came, 1486 to 1534 CE, and he ignited a bhakti renaissance all over the subcontinent of what we know now as India. But then by his will, within 100 years or so of his disappearance, the whole renaissance was eclipsed, overshadowed, driven underground, disgraced by so many imitation bhakti movements. Lord Chaitanya had a plan behind this. So let's start with Atul. Want to read that?
In the 16th century, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement ignited a bhakti revival throughout India. During the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, when Lord Chaitanya's movement was forced underground in India, the age of discovery and industrial revolution brought technology and new horizons to Europe. In the late 19th century, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur rediscovered Lord Chaitanya's pure teachings and envisioned a worldwide movement of Krishna consciousness. In the early 20th century, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Gaudiya mission revived Krishna consciousness in India and sent the first Vaishnava preachers abroad.
And then in the 1960s, the most amazing fine-tunings of the stage setting happened.
In the 1960s, when Srila Prabhupada sailed to the West, the Roman Catholic Church eased its attitude towards other faith traditions. The USA relaxed its Asian immigration laws, and the American counterculture began to look to the East for truth.
Yes. Amazing religious, political, and cultural adjustments Lord Chaitanya made to help Prabhupada launch the Hare Krishna movement. So in the early 1960s, Pope John the 23rd, much beloved by the people, was trying to reform the church, kind of like the way Francis is trying to do, Pope Francis today. So he convened Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council, and it met for 4 years. It met so long that Pope John actually died in office in the middle of it, and then the next Pope continued it. And then in 1965, the very year that Prabhupada came, they published many resolutions, and one was the Catholic Church admitted for the first time that God's grace could manifest in other faith traditions. They've dropped their claim of exclusivity, that they're the only way, right? So this gave very subtle but very powerful psychological permission to Roman Catholics worldwide, of whom there are many, to look at other faith traditions and see how God's grace could manifest in many ways. So one nice Roman Catholic young man in 1966, he was reading the Buddha's teachings. And he was working in the Lower East Side at New York City, and he would walk from his job at the welfare office to his apartment for lunch, and he had to pass by 26 2nd Avenue. So one day he was walking home for lunch, and he noticed out of the corner of his eye somebody in that storefront who looked to him like the Buddha. Big earlobes, shaved head, robes, sitting and cross-legged on this dais. But he didn't have time to stop, but he made a mental note to himself. He's got to go back. And there was also a sign in the window, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 7 p.m. Bhagavad Gita classes. And he'd been reading the Buddha. So he went back one evening and he asked the Swami a very Buddhist kind of question. Swamiji, how can I understand that I'm just nothing? That's the Buddha solution, right? Extinguish the self, extinguish desire, and you'll be free of suffering. So Prabhupada answered, you're not nothing, you're something, but you're not this body. So that intrigued the young man, and he went back, and he kept coming, and he became one of the regulars. He was Stephen Guarino, and he became Satsvarupa Das on Radhastami in September. And then 6 years later, he became Satsvarup Das Goswami in 72. And 6 years after that, he was commissioned by the GBC in 1978, just after Prabhupada passed on, to write Prabhupada's authorized biography. So these are all the arrangements of Krishna. And then, political arrangement. The USA relaxed its Asian immigration laws. Yeah, there were no Asians being led in the country between World War II and 1965, because Japan was our enemy in World War II, and we were occupying Japan, and it was still, kind of a leftover from that era. Finally, the Immigration and Naturalization Service relaxed that law, and they started admitting Asians in. And Prabhupada, of course, he came in 65. So he was allowed to enter, and he was allowed to extend his visa, and then finally he got a green card, and he was free to come and go and preach. Another powerful arrangement. Perhaps the biggest arrangement was that Lord Chaitanya gave Prabhupada an audience. He had no audience in India. If you read the Lilamrita in pre-USA days, A Lifetime in Preparation, Prabhupada, he said, I was crying alone in the wilderness. Nobody cared. After India got its independence, they just wanted to go charging into the industrial age. And Prabhupada's talking about Vedic culture, plain living and high thinking and saving the world. Nobody cared. So what did Prabhupada find? When he came to America, he found a whole generation of young people mad after anything from the East. This is where all the interest in yoga meditation really spiked. And so many devotees, to this day actually, not just our generation, but succeeding generations, they talk about what they were reading before they came to Krishna, Autobiography of a Yogi, Be Here Now, and all these books. I was reading Siddhartha, Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse. And then who were the Pied Pipers of our generation? The Beatles, and they started journeying to the East. So Lord Chaitanya, he was bringing everybody in that direction. He was creating these favorable breezes which helped Prabhupada launch his movement. So when Prabhupada finally did come to America, alone in America, Srila Prabhupada tried to revive Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's Gaudiya mission. The furthest thing from Prabhupada's mind was starting something new and becoming the founder Acharya of something new. No, he was trying to revive the Gaudiya mission. This is powerfully evinced when you go to the database, if you have the database or if you can get access to it. You go into correspondence, you go into 1965, and you see what Prabhupada is doing. He's observing Americans. He was in Sally Agarwal's house, Gopal and Sally Agarwal, for 3 weeks. Then he went to New York. He was observing Americans really closely. But he was also writing back to India, and he was expressing to his godbrothers I made it to America. Remember, this is what Guru Maharaj wanted. He wanted us all to work cooperatively to spread Krishna consciousness in the West. There's many, many letters like this. But I'm going to show you an excerpt from one letter which is very telling, to a person named Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, who was a real mover and a shaker in the Gaudiya Math. He had come from the Ramakrishna mission, which incarnated in America as the Vedanta Society. And when he heard Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he went to the Gaudiya Math. He was very inspired. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta put him pretty much in charge of managing the mission. He was a very good fundraiser, very good manager. So in the 60s, he was still alive, and he was still very active. Of course, it was after the breakup of the Gaudiya Math as a unified mission. But Prabhupada reached out to him. So how about Dhiro Datta Prabhu? I want you to read this excerpt. Notice how Prabhupada uses the word cooperate and cooperation a few times here.
So here is a chance for cooperation between us, and I shall be glad to know if you are ready for this cooperation. I came here to study the situation, and I find it very nice. And if you are also agreeable to cooperate, it will all be very nice by the will of Srila Prabhupada. If you agree, then take it for granted that I am one of the workers of the Sri Mayapur Chaitanya Math. I have no ambition for becoming the proprietor of any math or mandir, but I want working facilities. Letter to Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, 8th November, 1965.
If you only have time to read one of these letters, read this one. That's just one excerpt. It's a very long letter. Now look at this. You can be in charge. I'm just one of your workers. I have no ambition for becoming the proprietor of any mother. I want working facilities. There's so many people here, and they're all being duped by the Vedanta Society, by these Ramakrishna people, with their 10th class rubbish philosophy, Prabhupada wrote. They are attracting so many followers, and they got $1 million skyscraper here in New York City. We need $1 million skyscraper. And I'm here. I can organize, I can recruit. I just need funds. And you, Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, by the grace of Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta, you have those Marwaris, these really high-class business people, you have them in the palm of your hand. You can inspire them. And you also have the connections in Delhi to get the funds released, because Indian government didn't want to release rupees because it was a struggling country. You can get them released to convert them to dollars here. So, his letter to Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj captures the mood of his appeal long before the corporate culture coined the term servant leader. This is what Prabhupada was doing. To serve the revival of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's mission, not start one of his own. Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj's response sounded cooperative at first, but then later turned to avoidance. As it turned out, almost no one in the Gaudiya Math would help Srila Prabhupada preach in the West. Since their decades-long disobedience to the order of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta to work cooperatively had dismembered the Math's mission, Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers were incapable of cooperating with its revival. Yeah. So Lord Chaitanya, that first year, from September 65 to July 66, showed Prabhupada, you know, they're not going to help you. They can't help you. Too much had gone down. Too much water under the bridge, too much bad blood. The demon of non-cooperation was still very much alive, and the demon of envy. So Prabhupada realized that first year what Lord Chaitanya was asking him to do. He was going to have to make a clean break from the Gaudiya Math and start something fresh. So in 65 he came, he was in obscurity, and then he went to Swamiji. How about Alina? Can you see?
Yeah, maybe a little bit closer. Mostly neglected by his godbrother, Srila Prabhupada was obliged to found a fresh branch of the
Gaudiya Sampradaya.
Gaudiya Sampradaya. On July 13, 1966, in New York City, he incorporated the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, signing the papers only with his sannyasi name, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami.
Right. So at least he'd gone from obscurity to Swamiji. Swamiji is kind of familiar, but at least they were calling him Swamiji. Now 1 year later, in the summer of '67, Prabhupada revealed to some of his first followers what Lord Chaitanya had revealed to him, that only he could lead them. So what happened was, Prabhupada, he started the New York Center, and he started the San Francisco Center, and he came back to New York in April of '67. And in May, toward the end of May, he was getting ready to deliver a speech on the peace formula. So the morning of Memorial Day, he has a stroke/heart attack. For some days, he'd been complaining about some numbness and palpitations in the heart. And then on the morning of Memorial Day, when he was supposed to give the speech in the park, he just threw up his arms and he fell back and he said, "Hare Krishna." I don't think he lost consciousness. They took him to the hospital, and he had had a heart attack and he had a stroke because he was a little paralyzed on his left side. So this was a shock for the devotees, not only for Prabhupada. This was the third heart attack that Prabhupada was, when he had 2 on the ship and he was afraid if he had another one he would pass away. Well, this is the third one. This was a wake-up call for the devotees because they had come to just accept Prabhupada's superhuman pace of the way he was chanting and dancing and translating and just doing everything as the wonder that is Swamiji. But now they saw, okay, Swamiji's been taking care of us, now we have to take care of him. So they took him to the hospital didn't help. They took him to the Jersey Shore. But the weather wasn't cooperating, even though now it was early June. It was kind of blustery and cloudy, overcast. And in the meantime, the devotees whom he had inspired out on the West Coast, they wrote him a letter and said, "Oh, Swamiji, if you're not getting better on the East Coast, come out to sunny California, and you'll surely get better out here. And we're going to have a Rath Yatra. You know that idea you gave us about how to do the first Rath Yatra? Prabhupada said you can use a truck, for now." And then later he drew a cart. So we'll have Rath Yatra. Prabhupada took his second plane ride, or third plane ride, and he went out there because of the invitation and the hope that he would get better. But it's the Bay Area, and the Bay Area is actually not that sunny because of the nature of San Francisco Bay and the fog and the mountains. So they had Prabhupada parked in a little beach house at Stinson Beach, a little place called El Paradiso. And Prabhupada was so weak, he couldn't even go to the Rath Yatra. He had to stay back. First there was fog, and then the sun would finally rise way late morning and only be out a little bit, and then it would come rolling in again, later. He wasn't getting really the climate he needed. So he started speaking openly about going back to India to get his health back. He said he needed Ayurvedic medicines, he needed massage. So the devotees, these brand new devotees, they were like worried, what if Swamiji doesn't come back? What's going to happen to us? So both in a book called The Hare Krishna Explosion by the late Hayagriva Prabhu and in Mukunda Maharaj's Miracle on 2nd Avenue, we have an account of a very intense exchange between Swamiji and his followers who stayed back with him that day that he couldn't go to the Rath Yatra. And Mukunda Maharaj has the best recording of the whole thing. And here's how the exchange starts. To set it up, it was Kirtanananda, Hayagriva, and Mukunda, and Kirtanananda and Hayagriva said to Mukunda, "You have to ask Swamiji a question." And the question you'll see now. Okay. Prabhu.
When you die, what will happen to the movement, I asked. Will you have a successor who will continue your work and look after our spiritual education?
As I heard myself say the words, I realized it had been a mistake to ask this. The Swami sat silently, looking out the window at the sand dunes and the mountains, It was high tide, and I could hear the waves pounding the beach. Gulls shrieked. The Swami muttered something quietly. I couldn't hear what you said, Swami, I said carefully. Can you repeat it?
Actually, it is an insult to the spiritual master, he said.
He turned away from the window and looked at me pensively, as if he was hurt by my question. I'm sorry, Swami, I said. I felt like shrinking into the carpet. He closed his eyes. Outside a dog barked. A shallow stream of tears appeared below each of his eyes and flowed over his cheeks. He slowly wiped them away. My spiritual master, he said, and his voice choked to gravel. I was stunned. What had I done?
My spiritual master, he said, was no ordinary spiritual master. He paused again and then whispered falteringly, he saved me.
Ordinary spiritual master? How can a spiritual master be ordinary? Well, this is the only time I've actually seen Prabhupada use this term. Usually Prabhupada used the term regular spiritual master. So that was a very stunning exchange. Now luckily Hayagriva Prabhu, he also recorded the exchange, and he also recorded Prabhupada's, so to speak, purport about that exchange, because later in the day, or it might have been the next day, Prabhupada said something else. In his book, The Hare Krishna Explosion, Hayagriva Prabhu offers a similar account of the same incident, as well as Srila Prabhupada's crucial reflection later. So here's what Prabhupada said later.
Later, Swamiji tells us what we should have always known. There was no one to replace him. The very idea is insulting. If someone comes and tells you something different, he says, you will be confused.
So in both accounts, Srila Prabhupada refers to his Guru Maharaj as, quote, no ordinary spiritual master, reminding us of the difference between a regular spiritual master and a, quote, great Acharya. Neglected by his godbrothers, Srila Prabhupada knows and is now revealing that he is being uniquely empowered to lead the new international devotees as the founder Acharya of a fresh branch of Lord Chaitanya's, quote, desire tree of devotional service. It's CC Adi 12.73. Prabhupada refers to ISKCON as a branch of Lord Chaitanya's Bhakti Kalpataru, the desire tree of love of God. So Prabhupada's making it clear, only he could lead them. Despite non-cooperation from and differences with his godbrothers, later that year, Prabhupada made the following observation in a letter to the president of his New York City temple, Brahmananda. Quote, even amongst our godbrothers, we have misunderstanding, but none of us is astray from the service of Krishna. My Guru Maharaj ordered us to execute his mission combinedly. Unfortunately, we are now separated, but none of us have stopped preaching Krishna consciousness. Even if there was misunderstanding amongst the godbrothers of my Guru Maharaj, none of them deviated from the transcendental loving service of Krishna. So the incident was July, and that letter was in November. Srila Prabhupada, he has this ambivalent relationship with his godbrothers. On the one hand, he wants us to respect them as senior Vaishnavas, and they certainly were. On the other hand, he doesn't want us to take intimate association from them because they ruin the Gaudiya mission. So the above incident, only he could lead them, set the stage for Mahaprabhu to reveal Swamiji as Srila Prabhupada. So this is July 67, you fast forward 10 months to May 68. Prabhupada is in Boston to conduct the first Brahman initiations, which he did. And there were two ladies there, Govindadasi and Jadharani. And at first Prabhupada wasn't going to give them Brahman initiation because traditionally that's not the way it was done in India. The lady would simply get the devotional credit of her husband. But these were very outspoken, straightforward, modern, educated ladies, and so they didn't like it. They complained. So Prabhupada relented and also gave them Gayatri Mantra. Now Govindadasi has the best memory of how Swamiji became Prabhupada, because she reports that after ISKCON's first Brahman initiation in Boston in the spring of '68, Govinda recalls how, quote, Swamiji became Srila Prabhupada. All along, everyone knew him as Swamiji, Govinda reports. This is up until May of 1968. So my husband, Gorsundar, he decided he wanted to call me Govinda Ji, because Gorsundar was a very bright guy, and he was dabbling in Sanskrit. And so he noticed that Ji was a suffix that could be used as a term of affection. Panditji, Swamiji, even Prabhupada in his purports, Vyasaji, Naradaji. And so he asked Prabhupada if he could call his wife Govindaji. And Prabhupada said, no, actually, Ji is a third-class form of address. It's better not to call her Govindaji. So then Govinda says, so I piped up. I was sitting right in front of him. And I said, well, if it's a third-class form of address, why are we calling you Ji? Why are we calling you Swamiji? And he said, oh, it's not very important. I said, oh, no, it's very important. And Govinda is a very plain-spoken gal from Texas. You know, she shoots straight. Oh, no, it's very important. If it's a third-class form of address, then we don't want to call you that. Now watch how the conversation goes. At first, Prabhupada's trying to dismiss it as being not very important. But then things change. So how about Divya? Can you see from back there?
Yeah. We want to call you the most first-class form of address. So tell us what would be a good name for us to call you by. And he was very humble, very reluctant. But I pressed him. We've got to change this. And he said, you can call me Guru Dev or Guru Maharaj or Prabhupada. So I said, well, that's three. We need one. So which one is the best? And he answered, Srila Prabhupada is nice. That is the best. So I said, from today you will be called Srila Prabhupada.
Govinda Dasi ki. So you see how the conversation went. Prabhupada's trying to dismiss the whole thing. And then he sees, Lord Chaitanya had revealed already in 65, 66, what Prabhupada had to do. He had to start a fresh branch of the Sampradaya, and he's going to have to be the leader of it. He's going to have to be the founder Acharya of this. But Prabhupada knows these people don't know founder Acharya from the man in the moon, so he lets them call him Swamiji, and then in 67 he made it clear that only he could lead them. And he knows that if they're going to develop a proper attitude toward him, it's going to have to come from them. So here's the teachable moment. So Prabhupada offers them three. Okay, we need one. So then he says, Prabhupada. And then Govinda says, so I told all the devotees. Some of the devotees didn't like it because it's kind of a tongue twister, Prabhupada. And Swamiji, it kind of flows more easily. But we gradually started calling him Srila Prabhupada from that time. Now, here's an observation I make. If Srila Prabhupada had told Govinda Dasi that Gurudev or Guru Maharaj were the best, the name change would not have been so momentous. Seeing that his devotees wanted to respect him more, Srila Prabhupada took the opportunity to identify the role Lord Chaitanya and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had given him. In ISKCON's multiple guru culture today, we have different Gurudevs, but we all share the same foundational master, Srila Prabhupada, the master at whose feet all masters sit. So the stage was now set for Srila Prabhupada to formally identify himself in relationship to his ISKCON mission. So this actually happened the month I joined. In 1970, Srila Prabhupada formed the GBC, and in writing, it's called Directions of Management, he formally, in writing, identified himself in relationship to the mission. This is July 70. Prabhu, can you read this slide?
On July 28, 1970, when Srila Prabhupada legally established a governing body commission to manage ISKCON, especially after his demise, he formally identified his relationship to his mission.
And read that.
International Society for Krishna Consciousness Incorporated, founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivinoda Swami Prabhupada.
So on the day Prabhupada formed a governing body to manage ISKCON, he also formally identified his pivotal position in the mission as its founder Acharya. Determined that ISKCON not suffer the fate of his Guru Maharaj's mission, Prabhupada began training governing body commissioners to manage the society after his departure. And if something should happen to ISKCON, the next day he separately incorporated his publishing house, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. So Krishna consciousness would continue to spread. So that's 1970 summer. That's a title, but still people didn't necessarily understand Prabhupada's position. So 4 years later, 1974, chronic neglect of his absolute authority compelled Prabhupada to draft an amendment to his earlier management document, reasserting his supreme position in ISKCON in the strongest terms. And here's the excerpt from that document. Okay, so Gangamatra, you want to read that?
On July 22nd, 1974, Srila Prabhupada drafted an amendment to his earlier management document, reasserting his supreme position in ISKCON. It is declared that His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is the founder Acharya of ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He is the supreme authority in all matters of the society. His position cannot be occupied by anyone else, and his name and title must appear on all documents, letterheads, publications, and buildings of the society.
Those items were mentioned because there was neglect of his position, specifically on documents, letterheads, publications, and buildings. And today, to update it, we could add online. Neglect of his position had appeared in documents, letterheads, publications, on buildings, and in defiant actions, like the unauthorized sale of a temple, whose president vanished with the proceeds. One fine day, a temple president, unbeknownst to the devotees, sold the temple, took the money and ran, because the temple was not in ISKCON's name. So that was the last straw. So then Prabhupada had to reassert this legally in this document. One measure of our understanding and appreciation of Prabhupada's position today is how we present him on our websites and social media, official or otherwise. Now, over the next few slides, we'll see how Prabhupada contextualized his position, and ours as well, within the Gaudiya Sampradaya, coming through Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. This is interesting because Prabhupada did this in a purport, putting himself and ourselves in a certain context, even while he's reasserting his supremacy in ISKCON. Okay, so how about Dhirodada Prabhu?
That same year, 1974, even as Srila Prabhupada was reasserting his position as ISKCON's founder Acharya, while he was translating the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, he also reasserted his and our disciplic obedience and service to his own spiritual master in the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As members of the Krishna consciousness movement, we belong to the family or disciplic succession of Saraswati Goswami, and thus we are known as Saraswatis. Obeisances are therefore offered to the spiritual master as Saraswata Deva, or member of the Saraswata family. Namaste Saraswati Devi, whose mission is to broadcast the cults of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Gauravani Pracharine, and to fight with impersonalists and voidists, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatna Deshapati.
So by founding ISKCON, Prabhupada had made a clean break from the non-cooperation that had fragmented Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's Gaudiya mission. At the same time, Srila Prabhupada now reasserted his and our absolute dependence on and fidelity to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as disciplic executors of Lord Chaitanya's mission. So Prabhupada, he would always do this. He would always give all credit to his Guru Maharaj, the previous Acharyas. At the same time, he was empowered by those super people to do what he did, to do what no one had ever done. So in the final couple of slides, we're going to look at how Prabhupada identified himself as the founder Acharya in his only visit to South America, Caracas, Venezuela. It was February 1975, and Prabhupada's lecturing on Bhagavatam 1.1.1, famous verse, where Krishna is identified, how he's directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, how he's the source of all. So here it is said that origin is life, because here it is said, Yaton Vayad Itadatash Cha'arteshu Abhigyaksvarat. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent. And now we're going to hear Srila Prabhupada make a unique analogy. Just as Krishna is the source of the creation and knows everything indirectly and directly about the creation, so he, as founder Acharya,
that means I know everything directly and indirectly of all this movement. If I do not know directly and indirectly everything of this movement, then I cannot be called the founder Acharya. And as soon as the origin becomes a knower, he is like.
as soon as the origin becomes a knower, in other words, as soon as we understand that the origin is a conscious living entity, then we understand he's the life and soul of that creation. So just as Krishna, he's the origin of all, he's a supreme conscious living being. So Prabhupada is also the life and soul of ISKCON. He's the creator of ISKCON. So his life teachings, mood and mission, we have to be absorbed in to have that life, to get the same empowerment. And so let's look at how that plays out. Just because we're talking about Prabhupada as the founder Acharya, that doesn't mean anybody's neglected. And that's what I'm going to show here. How about Kirtan?
As ISKCON's founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada is the life and soul of all generations of his followers. Moreover, whoever enriches our foundational identity as Prabhupada Anugas is also glorious. Deepening the cooperation, we will need to take Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya's mission of Krishna consciousness to every town and village of earth.
Yes, Prabhupada is the life and soul of ISKCON, but how do we access Prabhupada? Through our gurus, especially. Of course, directly through Prabhupada's Vani, but we need help understanding and applying that Vani. So our Shiksha and Diksha gurus, they're the most important people in our very human lives. Okay, so before we do question and answers, I'd like to present the lesson outcomes. If I've been clear and you've been attentive, by the end of the lesson, students will be able to identify Puranic and Gaudiya prophecies Srila Prabhupada fulfilled, recount Lord Chaitanya's historical stage setting, East and West, for Prabhupada's advent, recount how Prabhupada went from obscurity to Swamiji, to only he, to Prabhupada, to founder Acharya between 1965 and 1970. Recount how Srila Prabhupada formally identified his supreme position in ISKCON and how he was later obliged to reassert that position. Identify the position of Prabhupada and ourselves in relation to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and Lord Chaitanya's mission. And finally, we should be able to identify Srila Prabhupada as the life and soul of all generations of his followers. So before we do the questions, just a brief preview. Next Sunday, you notice the different color, it's pink. We go now from the Sambandha section where the motif was blue, and now we're going to the Abhideya where the motif is pink. Having deepened our understanding of Prabhupada's relationship with all of us as our founder Acharya, Sambandha, we are now ready to enter the Abhideya phase of our seminar, how to act on our understanding by deepening our service to his mission. Okay, so try to keep your questions in relation to those learning outcomes. Prabhu?
When did Prabhupada introduce the mantra Namaste Saraswati?
If you read, the Lilamrita, it was in the spring. And this gets into why Prabhupada formed the GBC, the spring of 1970. There was some envy coming from India, which presented Prabhupada in a compromised light. Oh yes, he was a very good businessman, and that's why he's good at drumming up business in America, things like that. Just minimizing Prabhupada's position. So this kind of talk got back to the States, And it was affecting some of the devotees in America, some of the leading devotees. So Prabhupada, to inform the devotees of his position and his mission, he introduced these pranam mantras. The second mantra, Namaste Saraswati Deve. What is his mission? What is the mission of Saraswati Goswami? And he's fulfilling it. Our respectful obeisances are unto you, O spiritual master, servant of Saraswati Goswami. Bhaktisiddhanta had asked them all to do it, but Prabhupada did it. You are so kindly preaching the message of Lord Chaitanya in these Western countries, Paschatya Desh, so filled with impersonalism and voidism. So Prabhupada introduced the pranam mantra, and then in July, before he drew up the legal document, he began to approach people he could still trust. Tamal Krishna, Satsvarupa, Rupanuga, and other people. So he asked them to be on a GBC, because it was only in the last 24 hours of life that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had spoken his final will and testament. So Prabhupada started to train people to take over when he would leave. And they didn't really understand the full import, naturally, in 1970. But they agreed to join him on this GBC, to fortify ISKCON, to make it stronger, to protect ISKCON. So the pranam mantra came out in that context. Good question. Prabhu.
Srila Prabhupada, Guru Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur established Gaudiya Math to preach the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message all over India.
And abroad. He sent the first preachers abroad. He wanted to go abroad.
But then Srila Prabhupada separated himself from his Guru Maharaj's mission and established ISKCON.
He didn't separate himself from the mission, but he made a clean break. Lord Chaitanya, as I mentioned, Lord Chaitanya revealed to him, they're not going to cooperate. You're going to have to go it alone with me and your Guru Maharaj. You can do it. We're going to empower you.
And now, even though we Gaudiya Math and ISKCON devotees both are Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but there is some little misunderstanding.
Okay, so it sounds like you're asking what I asked Hari Shari Prabhu some years ago. How do we relate to the Gaudiya Math? After all, they're family. And Prabhupada had to say and publish many heavy things about what happened historically. But there was a kind of reconciliation at the end. So Hari Shari, when I asked him the question, he was already doing the Bhaktivedanta Research Center, and he was getting cooperation from some Gaudiya Math people, like Sundarananda, Vidya Vinod, his whole collection of Bhaktisiddhanta's writings. He gave it to the BRC, Bhaktivedanta Research Center. So Hari Shari said, we work with the Gaudiya Maths that are friendly and appreciative of Prabhupada's work, and we avoid those who aren't. That's all. It's just kind of common sense. And, you know, as time passes, as ISKCON goes on and Prabhupada's position becomes more and more obvious to everyone, you see more and more cooperation going on. And in fact, Prabhupada's last entity he created on his disappearance bed was the Bhaktivedanta Swami Charity Trust, which was to help Gaudiya entities all over Gaudamandala Bhumi, all over Bengal, to help them if they need help, financially or managerially. We can offer what we have to them, because Prabhupada wanted that. He wanted unity, because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, of course, wanted unity. You can do so much more when you're cooperating. So yeah, sometimes there's still misunderstandings, but everybody's, growing up. Thank you for attending, and please come back next Sunday for the beginning of Part 4, His Mission's Roots. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thus ends the first 3 lessons of the Founder Acharya series, Part 1, Deepening Our Love for Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.